The metallic click of a body bag zipper cut through the antiseptic silence of the El Paso County morgue like a knife through silk. Sarah Brennan stood motionless under the harsh fluorescent lights, her blue nursing scrubs still bearing the dried blood of a 12-hour emergency room shift that had ended 2 hours ago. The medical examiner, a weary man in his 60s with kind eyes that had seen too much death, watched her face carefully as he prepared to reveal what lay beneath the black vinyl. 2:47 in the morning. The hour when the world holds its breath between darkness and dawn, when truth becomes unavoidable and hope feels like a luxury reserved for other people. The examiner's latex-gloved hands moved with practiced gentleness. "Ma'am, you don't have to do this tonight. We can wait until morning, bring in a counselor, someone to sit with you." Sarah's voice emerged steady, flat, empty of everything, except the kind of control that comes from years of seeing broken bodies and shattered lives in trauma bays. "Open it." The zipper descended with agonizing slowness. The sound filled the room, a whisper of finality that seemed to echo off the stainless steel surfaces and white tile walls. What emerged was something that had once been human, once been young, once been someone's entire world. The body was burned beyond recognition, the flesh charred black in places, the features obliterated by fire that had consumed everything soft and distinctive. "Male," the examiner said quietly, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone who delivers unbearable news for a living. 19 to 25 years old based on bone structure. Dental records show a 73% match to the file you provided. Clothing remnants match the description you gave to the officers. University of Texas student identification card was recovered from the front pocket, partially melted but readable. Marcus Brennan. Sarah's hand moved without conscious thought, her fingers trembling slightly as they reached toward the body bag. She stopped inches from the blackened skin, suspended in the space between confirmation and denial. Her medical training kicked in automatically, the part of her brain that had been conditioned to assess injuries and calculate survival rates. Third-degree burns across 90% of the body surface. Charring pattern consistent with accelerant use, probably gasoline. Time of death estimated at 18 to 24 hours prior to discovery. Her son, her only child, the boy she had raised alone after his father died in a desert half a world away. The young man who wanted to be a doctor, who volunteered at free clinics on weekends, who still called her every night before bed no matter how old he got or how busy his schedule became. Reduced to this, an unrecognizable corpse on a morgue table at 2:45 on a Friday morning. "I'm sorry for your loss," the examiner said, and Sarah heard the genuine compassion in his voice. He had probably said those words 10,000 times in his career, but they still carried weight, still meant something. "If you need time alone, I can step outside. Some people find it helps to say goodbye." Sarah shook her head. No time alone, no goodbye, just the cold hard facts that her training demanded she acknowledge. She pulled her hand back, pressed it against her stomach where a hollow, aching void had opened up, spreading through her chest like ice water through her veins. "Can I see the personal effects?" The examiner moved to a nearby counter, retrieved a clear plastic evidence bag. Inside, Sarah could see the melted remnants of what had been Marcus's life. A warped cell phone, screen shattered and casing melted. The University of Texas ID card, Marcus's young face barely visible through the heat damage. A keychain with a small photo frame attached, the picture inside completely destroyed. $37 in bills, singed at the edges. A leather wallet, heat warped but intact enough to show the imprint of cards inside. Nothing else, no note, no explanation, no answers. The examiner watched her face carefully. "Mrs. Brennan, the police are treating this as a homicide investigation. The burn patterns, the location of the body, Several other factors suggest this wasn't accidental. Detective Morrison will want to speak with you later today. They'll need you to provide a timeline of when you last saw Marcus, who he was associating with, whether he seemed troubled or afraid. Sarah nodded mechanically. She knew the protocols. She had sat with enough grieving families in hospital waiting rooms to understand how these conversations went, how the questions would chip away at her composure, how the investigation would turn her son's life inside out looking for reasons why someone would do this to him. She turned toward the exit, her movements careful and controlled, a woman walking on ice that might crack beneath her at any moment. The automatic doors slid open and she stepped into the parking lot where the November air hit her face like a physical blow. Cold, clean, alive. She made it to her car, a 10-year-old Honda Civic that Marcus had helped her pick out, before the first sob broke through her defenses. Then another. Then a scream that tore from somewhere deep in her chest, a sound of pure animal grief that echoed across the empty lot and disappeared into the darkness. 5 minutes. She allowed herself 5 minutes to break, to be just a mother who had lost her child. Then she wiped her face, started the engine, and drove toward answers. The metallic taste of rage was replacing grief now, cold and sharp and focused. Someone had done this. Someone had taken her son, tortured him, burned him, left him in an abandoned lot like garbage. Someone was walking around free while Marcus lay on a morgue table. Sarah pulled out her phone with shaking hands, scrolled through her contacts to the name she had deleted and restored a dozen times over the past 5 years. The number she had promised herself she would never call again. The connection to a world she had left behind when she traded combat boots for nursing clogs. The phone rang 3 times before a voice answered, rough with sleep and instantly alert. "This is a dead line," the voice said. "No names, no details." Sarah's voice came out harder than she intended, stripped of everything except the barely controlled fury burning through her veins. "I need to know how to find someone. Someone who kills for the cartels in El Paso. Someone who burns bodies." Long silence. Then, carefully measured words. This is not the kind of conversation to have over open lines. Sarah stared at the dashboard, at the photo taped there of Marcus at his high school graduation, cap and gown and that brilliant smile that could light up a room. "My son is dead, burned alive, and I'm going to find who did it." Another pause. When the voice spoke again, it carried a different quality, something almost gentle beneath the tactical caution. "The Scorpion Riders. Motorcycle club out of Las Cruces, New Mexico, but they operate in El Paso. They handle enforcement for the Sinaloa cartel's local operations. If someone got burned in El Paso, they probably did it or know who did." "Where?" The voice hesitated. "Sarah, if you go after these people alone, you're going to end up on a table next to your boy. Call the FBI. Call DEA. Hell, call me and I'll make some calls, but don't do this yourself." "Where?" Sarah repeated, her voice dropping to something quiet and dangerous, something she hadn't used in 11 years, not since the last time she had climbed out of a helicopter into a hot landing zone with bullets snapping past her head. The voice on the other end recognized that tone. "Club on Route 9, 10 miles outside El Paso proper. Big warehouse building painted black, scorpion mural on the side. But Sarah, listen to me very carefully. These are not weekend warriors playing dress up. These are cartel enforcers with military weapons and zero conscience. You walk in there asking questions and you will not walk out." Sarah ended the call without responding, deleted the number from her recent calls, and sat in the parking lot as the first gray light of dawn began to creep across the eastern horizon. 36 hours earlier. Thursday evening, 6:15. Mercy General Hospital emergency room was in its usual state of controlled chaos, the controlled part being generous. Sarah moved between trauma bays with the efficient grace of someone who had spent 23 years keeping people alive when physics and human fragility conspired to kill them. Gunshot wound in Bay 3, stabilized and waiting for surgery. Motor vehicle accident in Bay 1, fractured femur and possible internal bleeding. Elderly woman in Bay 4, heart attack. Code blue 10 minutes ago but successfully resuscitated. Sarah, the nurse supervisor, called across the organized mayhem, "Go home. You've been here 18 hours straight." One more patient, Sarah called back, already moving toward Bay 6 where paramedics were wheeling in a gurney. She caught the handoff report on the move. Male, mid-20s, single GSW to the abdomen, suspected gang violence, found in an alley behind a liquor store on the east side. The patient was conscious, his dark eyes wide with pain and fear, one hand pressed against the blood-soaked compress taped to his stomach. Sarah's hands moved with automatic precision, cutting away clothing, assessing the wound, establishing IV access, calling out orders for blood type and cross-match. The young man's hand suddenly gripped her wrist with surprising strength. His voice came out in a harsh whisper, thick with pain and something else. Something urgent. "They're coming for the mechanic's kid. Tonight. Garage on 9th Street." Sarah's hands never stopped working, but her mind went very still. Marcus worked at Cruz Auto Repair. On 9th Street. "Who's coming?" Sarah asked quietly, keeping her voice calm and professional even as ice water began flowing through her veins. The young man's eyes were starting to glaze over, blood loss and shock pulling him under. "The ones who burn people, Scorpion Riders. They think the kid saw something bad." "What did he see?" The patient's grip loosened, his hand falling away as consciousness began to slip. Sarah worked faster, stabilizing the bleeding, prepping him for emergency surgery. But her mind was already somewhere else, already calculating distances and response times in worst-case scenarios. The moment the surgical team took over, Sarah was moving. She stripped off her bloody gloves, grabbed her phone from her locker, dialed Marcus's number as she ran toward the parking lot. Straight to voicemail, the generic automated message that meant his phone was either off or dead. She tried texting, "Where are you? Call me now." The message showed as undelivered. Sarah's Honda ate up the 6 miles to Cruz Auto Repair in 8 minutes, running 2 red lights and hitting 60 in a 35 zone. The garage was dark when she arrived, the big bay doors pulled down and locked, Louis Cruz's ancient pickup truck nowhere in sight. She parked, grabbed the small flashlight she kept in her glove box, and approached the building with the careful awareness of someone who had learned to move through hostile territory. The side door was unlocked, hanging slightly open. Wrong, everything about this was wrong. Sarah pushed the door open slowly, listening for any sound of movement inside. Silence. She stepped into the garage, letting her eyes adjust to the darkness, sweeping the flashlight beam across the familiar workspace where Marcus spent his afternoons and weekends earning money for medical school. His toolbox sat open near the far bay, tools scattered on the concrete floor as if he dropped everything and run. His coffee mug, the one with the faded medical school logo that Sarah had bought him for his birthday, sat on the workbench. She touched it, still faintly warm. Then she saw the blood. Not a lot, not the kind of arterial spray that meant someone had bled out on the spot, but enough. A scatter pattern on the concrete, already drying to rust brown. High-velocity spatter consistent with gunshot at close range. Sarah dropped to one knee, her medical training automatically categorizing what she saw. Small caliber, probably 9mm. Victim was standing when shot, blood drops indicate they remained upright and mobile afterward. She found Marcus's cell phone behind a tire rack, The screen shattered into a spiderweb pattern, the SIM card pried out and missing. Next to it, a single spent brass casing. 45 ACP, military grade. Sarah pocketed both items, her mind racing through possibilities. Marcus had been here. Marcus had been hurt. Marcus had either run or been taken. The rumble of motorcycle engines cut through her thoughts. She moved instantly, pure reflex, sliding behind a tool cabinet and killing her flashlight. 3 bikes pulled up outside, their engines cutting off one by one. The side door opened and 3 men entered, backlit by streetlights from outside. The first one was massive, 6'4" and probably 280 pounds, moving with the dangerous grace that came from knowing exactly how to use all that weight as a weapon. The second was wiry, tattooed from neck to fingertips, his movements quick and nervous like a predator that never stopped scanning for threats. The third wore a leather vest with patches that proclaimed him president of something. A silver-haired man with a scar running from ear to chin that gave his face a permanent sneer. Sarah held her breath, pressing herself deeper into the shadows. The silver-haired one spoke first, his voice carrying the casual authority of someone who had never been challenged and survived. "Kid saw too much. Boss wants him gone before he talks to the wrong people." The massive one responded, his voice surprisingly soft for someone his size. "You sure he was here, Venom? Blood's the right type according to Snake. Ob negative. Rare shit." The wiry one, presumably Snake, moved to the workbench, picked up Marcus's coffee mug, sniffed it. Still warm. He was here less than an hour ago. Venom, the president, walked slowly around the garage, his boots scuffing through the blood spatter. "Clean this up. All of it. If cops find evidence, if they start asking questions, we're all burned. Cartel doesn't like attention, and neither do I." Sarah watched through a gap in the tool cabinet as Snake pulled out a water hose, began spraying down the concrete. The blood swirled pink in the water, running toward the floor drains, evidence disappearing in real time. The massive one, the one Venom had called by an implied name she hadn't caught, kicked at Marcus's toolbox. "What about the mom? The kids got family. They gonna come looking." "Let them look," Venom said coldly. "They won't find anything. And if they get too curious, we'll handle them the same way we handle everyone who asks too many questions." Sarah's hand moved to her waistband, to the small canister of pepper spray she carried since she started working night shifts in the ER. 3 men, all bigger than her, all almost certainly armed. Terrible odds. But they were talking about Marcus like he was already dead, like they had already decided his fate. The rage that had been building since the morgue, since the moment she saw that burned body and heard the words 73% match, crystallized into something harder than diamond and twice as sharp. She waited until they finished hosing down the floor, until they mounted their bikes and roared away into the night. Then she emerged from hiding, walked to where the water was still draining away, and used her flashlight to examine what was left. The blood was mostly gone, but Sarah knew what she had seen. Marcus had been shot here. Someone had tried to kill her son in this garage. But the volume of blood suggested he had survived the initial attack. The scatter pattern indicated he had been mobile afterward. And the missing phone, the removed SIM card, suggested someone wanted to make sure he couldn't call for help. Sarah pulled out the brass casing she had pocketed, held it up to the light. 45 ACP was Cartel standard. The Scorpion Riders ran enforcement for Sinaloa, and they were looking for Marcus. She walked back to her car, her mind already 12 steps ahead, already planning. The voice on the phone had given her a location. Club on Route 9. Big warehouse painted black. Scorpion mural. Sarah didn't go home. She drove to her apartment, parked in the underground garage, and took the elevator to the third floor. Her apartment was exactly as she had left it that morning, neat and sparse and utterly impersonal. She had moved here 5 years ago after leaving the military, after trading her captain's bars for a nursing license, after deciding that she was done with violence and death, and the kind of decisions that left scars deeper than any wound. She went to her bedroom closet, pushed aside the civilian clothes, and knelt down to pry up a loose floorboard. The compartment underneath was small and carefully hidden. Inside was everything she had promised herself she would never need again. A Glock 19 military grade, the same model she had carried for 9 years across 2 war zones. 3 magazines, fully loaded. A tactical vest, black and unmarked, the kind that could stop most pistol rounds and some rifle fire. And a small encrypted phone, the kind that cost $3,000 and came with security protocols that would make the NSA jealous. Sarah assembled everything on her bed with the automatic efficiency of muscle memory. The Glock fit her hand like it had never left, the weight and balance as familiar as her own heartbeat. She checked the action, confirmed the magazines were properly seated, performed a functions check that her fingers could have done in her sleep. The encrypted phone powered up with a soft chime. No messages, no missed calls. The device had been silent for 5 years, sitting in that hidden compartment waiting for a day Sarah had hoped would never come. She opened the last message in the queue sent 63 months ago. The contact name was simply HQ. The message read, "Confirmed discharge approved. Reserve status activated. Contact only for emergency tasking. Stay safe, Captain." Sarah's fingers moved across the keypad, typing a message she had never wanted to send. Need immediate intel on Scorpion Riders MC El Paso area. Cartel connections. Known locations. Priority urgent. She hit send and watched the message encrypt itself, bounce through 3 proxy servers, and disappear into whatever black budget network the government used to communicate with assets who were supposed to be retired. The response came back in 90 seconds. Request received. Intel package compiling. ETA 12 minutes. Recommend you stand down and wait for official support. Sarah typed back, "Negative going in tonight, send what you have." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "Captain, this is inadvisable. The Scorpion Riders are designated hostile combatants with cartel backing. Recommend FBI coordination." Sarah stared at the screen, thinking about Marcus on that morgue table, about the 73% match that meant even the dental records weren't certain. She typed, "My son. They took my son. I'm not waiting for bureaucrats to fill out paperwork." The response was almost instantaneous. Understood. Intel package sent. Backup teams are 48 hours out minimum. If you go in alone, you are unsupported and unauthorized. Any action you take is strictly off the books. Sarah opened the Intel package. Blueprints of the Scorpion Riders Clubhouse. Known member roster with photos and criminal records. Weapons inventory based on surveillance and informant reports. Connection charts showing the club's relationship to various cartel operations. And one more file. A psychological profile on Victor Castellano, street name Venom, age 38, president of the Scorpion Riders. Former Army Ranger, dishonorably discharged for corruption and conduct unbecoming. 2 tour in Iraq, decorated for valor before the fall. Currently wanted by federal authorities for racketeering, murder, and conspiracy to distribute controlled substances. Sarah studied his photo. Cold eyes, hard face. The kind of man who had seen the worst the world had to offer and decided to become part of it. She downloaded everything to the encrypted phone's memory, then powered down the device and tucked it into her vest. The Glock went into a concealed holster at her hip. The spare magazines went into vest pockets. She checked herself in the mirror and saw someone she hadn't seen in 5 years. Not Sarah the nurse, not Sarah the mom, Sarah the soldier. Captain Sarah Brennan, 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, flight medic with 9 combat tour and more close calls than she cared to remember. She grabbed her car keys and headed for the door, then stopped, went back to her nightstand and picked up the small framed photo that sat there. Marcus at age 6, gap-toothed and grinning, holding up a crayon drawing he had made of a helicopter with a red cross on the side. Mom in the sky, saving people, the caption read in his childish handwriting. Sarah pressed her fingers to the glass to her son's face. "I'm coming, baby. Wherever you are, whatever they did, I'm coming." The drive to the Scorpion Riders Clubhouse took 37 minutes. Sarah used the time to run through tactical scenarios, to push down the grief and fear, and replace them with the cold operational mindset that had kept her alive in places where hesitation meant death. Route 9 was a long stretch of desert highway outside El Paso proper, the kind of road where streetlights were sparse and buildings were even sparser. The clubhouse appeared exactly as described in the intel package. Big warehouse, painted flat black, with a massive scorpion mural on the south-facing wall that was probably visible from space. The parking lot was full. Sarah counted bikes as she drove past, not slowing, just another car on the highway. 22 motorcycles, all Harleys or custom builds, all expensive and well-maintained. Music thumped from inside the building, loud enough to rattle windows. Friday night. The club was in full swing. Sarah drove another mile down the highway, pulled off onto a service road, and parked behind an abandoned gas station. She sat in the darkness, watching the clubhouse through binoculars she had pulled from her tactical vest. 4 guards outside, stationed at the corners of the building. Another 2 patrolling the perimeter. Figure 18 to 20 inside based on the bike count. All of them likely armed. All of them dangerous. Suicidal odds for a solo operator. But Sarah had been outnumbered before. In Kandahar when her helicopter went down, and she spent 11 hours keeping 6 wounded SEALs alive, while Taliban fighters tried to overrun their position. In Fallujah when she jumped from a hovering bird into a hot landing zone, because 3 wounded Rangers couldn't wait for the pilot to find safer ground. Being outnumbered just meant you had to be smarter, faster, and more committed than the people trying to kill you. Sarah checked her watch. 9:47. She gave herself exactly 3 minutes to be afraid, to think about all the ways this could go wrong, to imagine Marcus's face and wonder if she was about to join him in whatever came after death. Then she chambered around in the Glock, checked that her vest was properly seated, and started walking toward the clubhouse. The first guard spotted her when she was still 50 yards out. He straightened up from his position near the front entrance, one hand going to his waistband where Sarah could see the outline of a pistol. His partner, a younger man with gang tattoos covering his neck, moved to intercept. Sarah kept walking, her pace steady and deliberate, the Glock held low against her thigh but visible enough to send a message. The tattooed guard called out, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "Lady, I think you're lost. Nearest hospital is back toward town." Sarah stopped 10 feet from them. Her voice came out flat and hard. "I'm here for my son." The guards exchanged glances. The older one, the one who had spotted her first, shook his head slowly. "Ma'am, I don't know what you think this place is, but you need to turn around and go home before you get hurt." Sarah raised the Glock, not pointing it at them but making sure they could see it clearly in her hand. "Marcus Brennan, 19 years old, works at Cruz Auto Repair. You people took him. I want him back." The tattooed guard's hand moved toward his weapon. Sarah's gun came up faster, her aim rock steady on center mass. His hand froze. "Lady, you just made the biggest mistake of your life," the older guard said, but his voice had lost its casual confidence. His radio started to come up toward his mouth. Sarah's shot was perfectly placed, hitting the radio itself and blowing it apart in his hand. The sound was shockingly loud in the desert night. Both guards jumped, the tattooed one actually stumbling backward. "Next one goes higher," Sarah said quietly. "Where is my son?" The older guard was staring at his hand at the destroyed radio, his face pale. "Inside," he said. "Boss has him. But lady, you can't just walk in there. There's 20 men in that building and they will kill you." "Then they'll have to catch me first," Sarah said, and started walking toward the front entrance. The guards didn't try to stop her. They had just watched her put a bullet through a handheld radio from 10 feet away without hitting the man holding it. That kind of precision told a story that every combat veteran understood. This was not some desperate civilian waving a gun around. This was an operator. Sarah reached the front door and pushed it open. The music hit her like a physical wall of sound, some kind of heavy metal that made her teeth vibrate. The club's main room was exactly what she expected: pool tables, bar running along the back wall, leather couches and chairs scattered around, and men, lots of men. Conversations died like someone had flipped a switch. Pool cues stopped moving. Bottles froze halfway to mouths. Every single person in the room turned to stare at the small woman in blood-stained scrubs standing in their doorway with a gun in her hand. Sarah swept the room with the kind of tactical assessment that her instructors had drilled into her until it became as automatic as breathing. Count the threats, locate the exits, identify the leader, plan your engagement sequence. 23 men total, no women visible, most armed with pistols in waistbands or shoulder holsters. At least 3 visible shotguns behind the bar. 2 AR-15 style rifles mounted on the back wall like decorations. Back exit near the bar, side exit to her left, front door behind her. The man at the table in the back, the one with silver hair and that distinctive scar, was Victor Castellano. Venom, the president. He stood slowly, his movements careful and controlled. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see how their leader would handle this impossible situation. Sarah spoke before he could, her voice cutting through the music that someone finally had the sense to turn down. "I'm here for my son, Marcus Brennan, and I'm not leaving without him." Venom studied her for a long moment, his eyes taking in details that most people would have missed. The way she stood with her weight balanced and ready to move. The professional grip on her weapon. The complete lack of fear or hesitation in her face. "Lady," he said finally, "I think you have the wrong address. Hospital's back toward El Paso." Scattered nervous laughter rippled through the room. Sarah didn't smile, didn't blink, didn't move. "His motorcycle is in your parking lot, blue Kawasaki. License plate 8JM742. I checked it 20 minutes ago. Engine still warm, keys are still in the ignition. He didn't ride away, so where is he?" The laughter stopped. Venom's expression shifted slightly, reassessing the woman in front of him. The massive enforcer Sarah had seen at the garage moved away from the bar, his footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. "Boss, want me to take care of this?" Venom raised one hand, a gesture that froze the big man in place. "Wait," to Sarah, in a voice that carried genuine curiosity. "What makes you think we'd know anything about your boy?" "Because I was at Cruise Auto Repair 90 minutes ago," Sarah said. "I saw the blood on the floor. I found the bullet casing. I watched 3 of your men clean up the scene and talk about making problems disappear." She paused, letting that sink in, watching Venom's face carefully for any reaction. "You shot my son. You tried to kill him. And if he's dead, if you burned him and dumped him and thought that was the end of it, You have made an enemy who will not stop until every single person in this room has answered for it." The room erupted. Men stood up, hands going to weapons. Angry voices overlapped. The massive enforcer took another step toward Sarah. But Sarah's gun never wavered from venom, and in her eyes, something burned that made even hardened criminals hesitate. From a corner of the room, an older man stood up slowly. He was maybe late 60s, weathered face and gray beard, wearing a leather vest with a patch that said something about Vietnam. His voice cut through the chaos with surprising authority. "Everyone shut up and sit down." The room obeyed. Even the massive enforcer stepped back. The old man walked toward Sarah, his hands visible and empty. "Ma'am, my name is Frank Morrison. People call me Doc. I'm the club medic, and I think maybe we all need to take about 10 seconds to calm down before someone does something that can't be undone." He stopped a respectful distance from Sarah, close enough to talk without shouting, far enough that he wasn't a threat. "You said you were at Cruz's garage. You saw blood. You found a casing. That tells me you know what you're looking at. That tells me you've got training. So let me ask you something, ma'am. Where did you serve?" Sarah felt something shift in the room, a change in the energy in the way the men were looking at her. Not just a crazy woman with a gun anymore, something else. She met Doc's eyes and saw understanding there, recognition, one soldier to another. Her voice came out quieter but no less intense. "Afghanistan, Iraq, places that don't have names on any map. 9 tour over 11 years. I was a flight medic. 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment." Doc's eyes widened slightly. He straightened, came to attention, and rendered a perfect military salute. "Ma'am, night stalkers don't quit." Sarah found herself returning the salute automatically, muscle memory from a life she thought she had left behind. The room had gone completely silent now. Even Venom was watching with a different expression, reassessing everything he thought he knew about the situation. Doc lowered his salute and spoke to the room. "For those of you who don't know, the 160th SOAR are the best helicopter pilots and crews in the world. They fly special operations missions into places where one mistake means everyone dies. Their motto is night stalkers don't quit because they don't leave people behind. Ever." He turned back to Sarah. "Ma'am, if your boy is here, if he's hurt, I give you my word as a fellow medic and a fellow veteran that we'll bring him out. But you coming in here with a gun, threatening people, that's not going to solve anything. Let's all take a breath and figure out what's really going on." Sarah wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that there was still honor and decency somewhere in this place. But she had seen the blood at the garage, had heard these men talk about cleaning up evidence and making problems disappear. "Where is Marcus?" she asked Doc, her voice steady but carrying all the weight of a mother's desperate need for answers. Before Doc could respond, Venom spoke up from his position at the back table. "Bring him out." Every head in the room swiveled toward the president. Venom's face was unreadable. "You want your son? Fine. Let's see if this is all just a big misunderstanding." 2 men disappeared through a doorway near the bar. The wait was agonizing. Sarah kept her gun trained on Venom, but her peripheral vision tracked everyone else in the room. If this was a setup, if they were about to come out shooting, she would take Venom first and as many others as she could before they brought her down. The 2 men returned, half carrying, half dragging a third figure between them. They dropped him on the floor in the center of the room. It was Marcus. Sarah's heart stopped. Her son lay motionless on the wooden floor, his shirt soaked with blood, his face pale and slack. She couldn't tell if he was breathing. Every instinct screamed at her to run to him, to drop the gun and check his pulse and start first aid. But that was what they expected. That was how they would take her weapon and turn this situation from standoff to execution. Instead, Sarah's voice came out cold and clinical, the flight medic taking over. Is he alive? Doc was already moving, kneeling beside Marcus, his hands moving with professional efficiency, checking pulse at the carotid, lifting one eyelid to check pupil response, pulling back the bloody shirt to expose the wound. He's alive, Doc called out. Gunshot wound to the left shoulder, through and through. He's lost blood, but the bullet missed the major vessels. He's in shock, but he's stable. Ma'am, I can treat him, but I need you to put the weapon down so I can work. Sarah didn't move. How do I know this isn't a trick? How do I know you won't kill us both the second I lower my guard? Venom stood up from his table, moving slowly and deliberately. Because if I wanted you dead, lady, you would have died the moment you walked through that door. I've got 23 men in this room and you've got one pistol. The math isn't complicated. He walked closer, stopping just outside what would be the effective range for Sarah to maintain her weapon on multiple targets. But here's what I'm curious about. You walked in here alone. No backup. No tactical team. No cops waiting outside. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the craziest. And looking at you, seeing that military bearing, hearing about your service record, I'm thinking maybe you're a little bit of both. He gestured toward Marcus. Your boy saw something he shouldn't have seen. Tuesday night. Right here in this parking lot. Some business was being conducted, some business that's none of his concern, and he decided to play hero. Called some people he probably shouldn't have called. So yes, we grabbed him. Yes, someone shot him. But if we wanted him dead, he'd be dead. We wanted him scared. Wanted him to understand that there are things in this world you don't talk about, people you don't cross, lines you don't cross unless you're ready to deal with the consequences. Sarah's mind was racing. Marcus saw something Tuesday night, called someone. That matched the timeline, but who had he called, and what had he seen? Who did he call? Sarah asked. Venom smiled, but there was no warmth in it. That's the question, isn't it? We found him hiding here Wednesday morning, scared out of his mind. Wouldn't tell us who he talked to or what he said, so we encouraged him to stay quiet, made sure he understood the consequences of running his mouth. The gunshot. Venom shrugged. That was Tank being overzealous. He was supposed to scare the kid, not shoot him. We had words about that. Sarah looked at the massive enforcer, saw him shift uncomfortably under her gaze. Doc called out from where he was working on Marcus. Ma'am, I need supplies. Medical kit is in the back room. But I need to start an IV, get fluids in him, clean and pack this wound properly. He's going to be okay, but I need to work. So either trust me or don't, but decide now because every minute we wait is a minute he's in shock. Sarah made a decision that went against every tactical instinct in her body. She lowered the Glock slightly, not holstering it but taking it out of direct line on Venom. Doc, do what you need to do. But if anyone in this room makes a move I don't like, I start shooting and I don't stop until the gun runs dry. Clear. Crystal, Doc said, already moving toward the back room. Venom sat back down at his table, waved a hand at his men. Everyone relax. Nobody moves. Nobody touches their weapons. Let the medics work. The tension in the room didn't disappear, but it shifted, from imminent violence to wary standoff. Sarah moved closer to Marcus, close enough to see his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. He looked so young lying there, so vulnerable. Her baby boy who used to climb into her bed during thunderstorms, who brought her breakfast in bed on Mother's Day, who called her every night no matter how busy he was. Doc returned with a large medical kit, the kind that military medics carried in combat zones. He worked with impressive efficiency, starting an IV line, hanging a bag of saline from a makeshift stand that one of the bikers rigged up. His hands moved with the sure confidence of someone who had done this hundreds of times under much worse conditions. Sarah watched every move, her medical training automatically critiquing his technique. But she had to admit, Doc knew what he was doing. The IV was perfectly placed. The wound cleaning was textbook. The bandaging was tight and professional. "You're good," she said quietly. Doc glanced up at her with a slight smile. "Vietnam, ma'am, 1st Cav, 3 Tour. Saw more gunshot wounds than I care to remember. Your boy here is lucky. Another 3 inches to the right and that bullet clips the subclavian artery. He bleeds out in minutes." Marcus stirred, his eyes fluttering open. His voice came out weak and confused. "Mom." "I'm here, baby," Sarah said, dropping to one knee beside him while keeping her gun hand free and ready. "I'm right here." Marcus's eyes focused on her face, then widened as he took in the room around them, the armed bikers, the situation they were in. "Mom, what are you doing here? You need to run. They'll kill you." "Nobody's killing anyone," Sarah said firmly. "At least not tonight. You just rest. Doc's taking care of you." Marcus tried to sit up, but Doc pressed him back down gently. "Easy, kid. You've lost a lot of blood. Just stay still and let the fluids do their work." Sarah looked up at Venom. "He's coming with me to a hospital, real doctors, real treatment." Venom shook his head slowly. "Can't do that. Hospitals mean questions. Questions mean police. Police mean problems for everyone in this room." "Then we have a problem," Sarah said, her voice going hard again. "Maybe not," Venom replied. "Maybe we can make a deal. You want your son safe. We want to know what he told the people he called Tuesday night. Seems like there's room for negotiation." Sarah's mind raced through the implications. "What did you see, Marcus? What was so important that these people would shoot you over it?" Marcus's voice was getting stronger as the IV fluids began to work. "Tuesday night, late. I was working on a transmission, lost track of time, heard a commotion outside, looked out the window, saw men in the parking lot here, arguing. Then one of them pulled a gun." "Who?" Sarah asked. "Man in a suit, expensive suit. He was yelling at someone, saying something about betrayal and federal investigations. Then he shot the other guy, twice, chest shots. The man went down and didn't get up." The room had gone very quiet. Even the background music seemed to have disappeared. Venom's face was carefully neutral, but Sarah could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. "And then what?" Venom asked Marcus quietly. "Then I ran," Marcus said. "Called 911, told them I'd witnessed a murder, gave them the location. They told me to hide, that officers were on the way, so I hid in the garage. But before the cops could get there, your men found me. Said if I talked to police, my family would pay. Said they'd burn us all." Sarah's grip tightened on the Glock. The pieces were falling into place now. The federal investigation angle, the desperation to keep Marcus quiet, the willingness to shoot a civilian. "Who was the victim?" she asked Venom. "Who got shot?" Venom stared at her for a long moment. Then, with the air of a man who had just decided to burn his bridges, he answered, "Detective James Hale, or that's what he called himself. But we found out later he was DEA. Undercover. 8 months he spent infiltrating this club, feeding information back to his handlers." Sarah felt ice water flood her veins. James Hale. Jim. The man who had been her commanding officer in Afghanistan, who had taught her how to survive in a war zone, who had saved her life in Fallujah and who she had saved in return more times than either of them could count. Jim Hale was dead, and Marcus had witnessed his murder. The room began to spin. Sarah forced herself to breathe, to stay focused, to not let the grief and shock overwhelm her tactical awareness. "Where's the body?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Venom shook his head. "We don't have it. The man who shot Hale, the man in the expensive suit, he had people with him. They loaded the body into a car and drove off. We don't know where. All we know is that 12 hours later, federal agents started raiding our satellite operations, seizing records, freezing accounts. Someone high up decided to burn us, and Hale was the match that lit the fuse." Doc had finished treating Marcus and was helping him sit up slowly, propped against one of the leather couches. The kid's color was better, his breathing more stable. Sarah stood, her knees protesting the movement. Her mind was trying to process too much information at once. Jim was DEA. Jim was undercover. Jim was murdered. Marcus witnessed it. And now everyone in this room was either a target or a suspect. Outside, the distinctive sound of sirens began to build in the distance. Multiple vehicles, coming fast. Venom's head snapped toward the windows. "Everyone freeze. Who called the cops?" The bartender, a woman Sarah hadn't noticed before, raised her hand shakily from behind the bar. "I did. When I heard the gunshot outside. I called 911. The sirens were getting louder, closer." Venom cursed viciously. "Everyone out, back exit, move." His men started to scramble, but Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. "Nobody moves." She had her Glock trained on Venom again. The sirens were maybe 2 minutes out now. "Those aren't local police," Sarah said, her military intelligence training kicking in. "That's federal response. Multiple agencies. They've been waiting for an excuse to raid this place, and you just gave it to them." "How do you know that?" Venom demanded. "Because I know how these operations work," Sarah replied. "Jim Hale was undercover for 8 months. That means there's a task force. That means they've been building a case. That means they've had surveillance on this location for weeks at minimum. My gunshot gave them probable cause to breach immediately instead of waiting for a warrant." She looked around the room at the panicked faces. "And every single person in here is about to be arrested, charged, and prosecuted unless we figure something out in the next 90 seconds. Venom stared at her. "You set us up. This whole thing was a setup." Sarah shook her head. "I didn't even know Jim was working this case. I haven't talked to him in 5 years. But I know my son witnessed a murder, and I know federal agents are about to come through that door with enough firepower to level this building." The sirens were right outside now. Red and blue lights painted the windows. A loudspeaker crackled to life. "Scorpion Riders Motorcycle Club. This is the FBI. We have a federal warrant. Exit the building with your hands visible or we will breach by force." Sarah looked at Marcus, then at Doc, then at Venom. She had maybe 15 seconds to make a decision that would determine whether everyone in this room lived or died. "Tell your men to put their weapons on the floor," Sarah said to Venom. "Tell them to comply with federal agents. Tell them to lawyer up and keep their mouths shut. And tell them that if anyone makes a hostile move when those doors open, the feds will kill us all and call it justified." "Why should I trust you?" Venom asked. "Because 5 years ago I saved the life of an Army Ranger in Fallujah," Sarah replied. "I jumped from a helicopter that was taking fire, pulled 3 wounded soldiers from a kill zone, and kept them breathing for 40 minutes until we could get extraction. One of those Rangers had a compound fracture of the spine. I stabilized him myself, kept him from going into shock, made sure he lived to see his family again." She paused, watching Venom's face. "You have a scar on your lower back, left side, about 6 inches long, surgical-grade stitching. I know because I'm the one who put those stitches in." Venom's face went white. His hand unconsciously moved to his lower back, touching the place where Sarah knew that scar was hidden under his leather vest. "The ghost," he whispered. They told me the flight medic who saved us was like a ghost, appeared out of the smoke and fire, patched us up, disappeared again before we could even see her face clearly. But I saw the tattoo on her shoulder. Night Stalker Eagle. Sarah pulled down the collar of her scrubs, just enough to show the edge of her tattoo. I saved your life once, she said quietly. Let me save it again. Tell your men to stand down. The building shook as the FBI began their breach. Flash bangs, smoke grenades, tactical teams pouring through every entrance. Venom stood, raised his voice over the chaos. Everyone on the ground, hands behind your head. Do it now and do not resist. To Sarah's surprise, his men obeyed. Weapons clattered to the floor. Bodies dropped to prone positions. Even the massive enforcer tank went down without protest. Sarah lowered her own weapon, set it carefully on the floor, and went to her knees beside Marcus. Federal agents in full tactical gear swarmed into the room, rifles up, voices shouting commands. Clear the corners. Secure all subjects. Check for additional weapons. A woman in an FBI windbreaker pushed through the tactical team, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, her eyes sharp and assessing as she took in the scene. She stopped when she saw Sarah kneeling beside Marcus. Sarah Brennan, the woman said. It wasn't a question. Sarah met her gaze steadily. That's right. The FBI agent looked around the room, at the 23 bikers lying prone on the floor, at the weapons piled in the center, at the complete lack of resistance. Her expression was somewhere between impressed and confused. I'm Special Agent Rebecca Song, the woman said, and I have a lot of questions about what the hell just happened here. Sarah helped Marcus to his feet, keeping one arm around him to support his weight. He's going to need an ambulance. Gunshot wound to the shoulder. He's stable, but he needs proper medical care. Song gestured to one of her agents. Get EMS in here now. To Sarah, in a lower voice that didn't carry to the rest of the room. We've been surveilling this location for 6 weeks. We were preparing to execute a raid warrant next Tuesday. So imagine my surprise when we get a 911 call about shots fired and I see your vehicle in the parking lot. You know me, Sarah said carefully. I know that James Hale put your name in his emergency contact protocols 5 years ago when he started working undercover operations. Song replied. I know that he listed you as the one person he trusted absolutely if things went sideways. And I know that he went missing 36 hours ago, and we found his car burned out near the Mexican border this morning. Sarah felt the floor drop out from under her. Jim's car, burned, just like the body in the morgue, just like they had tried to do to Marcus. He's alive, Sarah said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of absolute certainty. Song's eyes narrowed. What makes you so sure? Because if Jim Hale was dead, you wouldn't be running surveillance on this club, Sarah replied. You'd be kicking in doors and arresting everyone in sight. The fact that you're still watching means you think he's alive, and you're waiting for him to surface or waiting for his captors to make a mistake. Song stared at her for a long moment. Then, so quietly that only Sarah could hear, he made contact 6 hours ago. 30-second burst transmission from an unknown location. Said he was being held by cartel operatives who think he has information about federal witness protection protocols. Said they're torturing him for intel on where we've relocated people who testified against the cartel. Sarah's medical training kicked in automatically. 6 hours ago. Torture. That meant Jim had maybe another 12 hours before shock or blood loss or infection would kill him even if his captors kept him alive. I can get him out, Sarah said. Song shook her head. Absolutely not. This is a federal operation. We have protocols. We're coordinating with DEA, ATF, local law enforcement. We'll locate him and extract him using proper channels." Sarah looked around the room at the chaos, at the federal agents processing evidence and taking statements, at the bureaucratic machine that would need warrants and approvals and interdepartmental cooperation. "How long will that take?" she asked. "Realistically, how many hours before you have legal authorization to breach whatever location he's being held at?" Song's silence was answer enough. "He'll be dead by then," Sarah said flatly. "You know it and I know it. So either you let me help or you tell his family that he died while you were filling out paperwork." Song studied Sarah's face. "Why do you care so much? You've been out of the military for 5 years. You're a civilian nurse. Why would you risk your life for this?" "Because Jim saved my life in Fallujah," Sarah replied. "Because he taught me that you never leave people behind. Because my son witnessed his murder and I will not let the man who killed him or tried to kill him get away with it." She paused, then played her final card. "And because you need someone who can get in and out of a cartel stronghold without starting a war. Someone who has the training and the experience and absolutely nothing left to lose." Song looked at Marcus, at the blood-stained bandages and the IV line that Doc had rigged up, then back at Sarah. "If I authorize this, if I let you attempt a rescue operation, it would have to be completely off the books. No federal support, no backup. If you get caught or killed, we deny everything." Sarah nodded. "I understand." "And you'd have to take someone with you. Someone who knows the cartel's operational patterns. Someone who's been inside their networks." Sarah followed Song's gaze to where Venom was being zip-tied by federal agents. "You want me to work with him," Sarah said. "I want you to succeed," Song replied. "And Victor Castellano, for all his many crimes and failings, knows more about how the Sinaloa cartel operates in this region than anyone else we have access to. He also owes you his life, if what you said about Fallujah is true." She raised her voice slightly. "Agent Morrison, bring me the prisoner Castellano." 2 agents hauled Venom to his feet, walked him over to where Sarah and Song stood. His face was carefully neutral, but his eyes were calculating, trying to figure out what was happening. Song looked at him. "Mr. Castellano, I'm prepared to offer you a deal. Full cooperation in locating and rescuing Agent Hale in exchange for consideration on your current charges." Venom laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want me to help rescue the Fed who spent 8 months trying to destroy my club? I want you to help rescue the man who was murdered right in front of your clubhouse, while you and your people did nothing," Song corrected. "I want you to prove that you're not completely beyond redemption, and I want you to repay the debt you owe to Captain Brennan for saving your life 15 years ago." Venom's eyes shifted to Sarah. "You're really going after him, into cartel territory, with no backup?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I've done worse with less." The sirens outside had multiplied. More federal vehicles arriving, more agents, more bureaucracy and more delays. Venom looked at the chaos around them, at his club being dismantled piece by piece. Then back at Sarah and that damn tattoo peeking out from her scrub's collar. "All right," he said finally, "I'll help, but on one condition." Song's eyebrows rose. "You're not really in a position to negotiate." "My condition is for her, not you," Venom said, nodding toward Sarah. "I help you get your Fed back. But when this is over, you tell me the truth. About Fallujah. About that day. Because I've spent 15 years wondering if the ghost medic was real or just something I imagined while I was bleeding out." Sarah nodded slowly. "Deal." Song looked between them. "You have 12 hours before Agent Hale's condition becomes terminal. I can give you equipment, intelligence, and a window of deniability. But after that, This becomes an official federal operation, and anyone still inside the target area is considered hostile. Sarah checked her watch. 12 hours, it would have to be enough. She looked down at Marcus, who had been listening to everything with wide eyes. "You're staying here. Federal protection. Agent Song will make sure you're safe." Marcus grabbed her hand. "Mom, don't do this. Let the FBI handle it. You don't have to be the hero." Sarah knelt down so she was eye level with her son. "Baby, heroes are people who do what's right even when it's hard. Your father taught me that. He lived by it. He died by it. And now it's my turn to honor his memory by not leaving someone behind." She kissed his forehead, stood up, and looked at Agent Song. "Where do we start?" Song gestured toward the door where a black SUV was pulling up. Intelligence briefing, equipment loadout, and a very long conversation about what happens if you don't come back alive. Sarah walked toward the door, Venom beside her, Doc Morrison somehow materializing at her other side. "Ma'am," Doc said quietly, "I'm coming too." Sarah stopped. "Doc, you're 67 years old. And you're going to need a medic if Agent Hale is as badly injured as we think," Doc replied. "I didn't spend 3 tours in Vietnam just to sit on the sidelines when people need help. Besides, someone needs to make sure you two don't kill each other before you find the target." Venom actually smiled slightly at that. Old man's got a point. Sarah looked at both of them, these two men who by all rights should have been her enemies, who were now volunteering to walk into hell beside her. Outside, the November night was cold and clear. Stars were visible beyond the glare of emergency lights. Somewhere out there, Jim Hale was running out of time. Sarah climbed into the SUV. Venom and Doc followed. Agent Song took the front passenger seat. As they pulled away from the clubhouse, Sarah looked back one last time. Through the windows she could see Marcus being loaded onto a stretcher, federal agents swarming everywhere, the organized chaos of a major law enforcement operation. Her son was safe. That was what mattered. Everything else was just details. The SUV accelerated into the darkness, carrying 4 people toward a confrontation that would determine whether Jim Hale lived or died, whether Sarah's promise to never leave people behind still meant something, and whether redemption was possible for a man like Victor Castellano, who had spent 15 years running from the ghost of the woman who had once saved his life. The night was just beginning, and before dawn came, blood would be spilled, truths would be revealed, and Sarah Brennan would remember exactly who she had been before she traded her captain's bars for a nursing license. The night stalker, the ghost medic, the woman who jumped into fire to pull out the wounded and who never, ever quit. Agent Song's encrypted phone buzzed with an incoming message. She read it, her face going pale in the dashboard lights. "What is it?" Sarah asked. Song's voice was tight. "We just got another transmission from Agent Hale. 30 seconds. He's at a warehouse on Route 9, 12 miles from here, and he says the cartel knows you're coming. They're expecting you." She turned to look at Sarah. "This is a trap. They want you to come. They're using Hale as bait." Sarah's expression didn't change. "Then we'd better not disappoint them." The SUV's engine roared as they accelerated into the night, racing toward a confrontation where the only certainty was that, before the sun rose, someone was going to die. The FBI Mobile Command Center smelled like burnt coffee and tactical tension. Sarah Brennan stood over a table covered in satellite imagery, thermal scans, and architectural blueprints, while Agent Rebecca Song laid out the hard truths about what they were walking into. The warehouse on Route 9 was a former meatpacking plant, 3 stories of concrete and steel that had been abandoned for 15 years before the Sinaloa cartel purchased it through a shell corporation, and turned it into exactly the kind of place where people disappeared. 8 guards on perimeter patrol, Song said, her finger tracing positions on the thermal overlay. 4 more inside on the main floor. 2 stationed directly outside the basement where we believe Agent Hale is being held. The thermal signature in that basement room is consistent with a single person in severe distress. Elevated body temperature suggesting infection or significant injury. "How long has he been there?" Sarah asked, her voice clinical and detached in the way that combat medics learn to separate emotion from assessment. 36 hours minimum based on when he missed his last scheduled check-in. Song pulled up another image, this one showing heat signatures clustered in what looked like a loading bay area. But here's our problem. At 0400 hours, approximately 90 minutes from now, these thermal signatures appear. 20 to 25 additional personnel arriving in convoy. Intelligence suggests this is Ramon Vega, regional cartel commander, coming to personally oversee Hale's interrogation. Victor Castellano, still technically in federal custody despite the handcuffs having been removed for this briefing, leaned forward to study the images. His scarred face was unreadable in the harsh LED lighting of the command vehicle. Vega doesn't show up for routine business. If he's coming in person, it means either Hale has information Vega desperately wants, or Vega wants to send a message by killing a federal agent himself. Or both, Doc Morrison added from where he sat checking medical supplies. The old Vietnam medic had somehow convinced Song to include him in the operation, though Sarah suspected it had less to do with convincing and more to do with Doc simply refusing to be left behind. In my experience, men like Vega don't separate business from pleasure. He'll get what he wants from Hale, then he'll make the killing last long enough to enjoy it. Sarah studied the warehouse layout with the tactical eye that 11 years of combat operations had trained into her bones. 3 potential entry points. Front-loading dock, heavily guarded and under constant surveillance. Rear service entrance, covered by 2 roaming patrols, and a roof access hatch that thermal imaging suggested was unwatched but likely alarmed. The problem wasn't getting in. Sarah had infiltrated harder targets with worse odds. The problem was getting out with an injured man while cartel soldiers with automatic weapons tried to kill them all. "What's the FBI's official position on this operation?" Sarah asked Song without looking up from the blueprints. Song's pause spoke volumes. "Officially, there is no operation. Officially, you were released from federal custody after questioning about the incident at the Scorpion Riders Clubhouse. Officially, if you choose to attempt a rescue of Agent Hale, you're acting as a private citizen without federal authorization or support." "Unofficially," Sarah prompted. "Unofficially, I have a Delta Force tactical team staged 2 miles from the warehouse perimeter. They have orders to move in at 0500 hours, 1 hour after Vega's expected arrival, to execute a federal warrant for his arrest. If you happen to extract Agent Hale before that window, if you happen to destabilize the cartel's defensive posture in the process, well, that would certainly make the Delta team's job considerably easier." "So we're the distraction," Venom said flatly. "You're using us to draw fire so your professional soldiers can swoop in and take the credit." "I'm using available assets to save the life of a federal agent," Song corrected. "And I'm offering you an opportunity to prove that you're more than just another criminal who got caught. Your cooperation here, your assistance in rescuing Agent Hale, that carries weight with federal prosecutors. That's the difference between life in prison and a chance at something resembling a future." Sarah looked at Venom, saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. The man was a survivor, someone who had spent his entire adult life making deals and weighing odds and finding angles that kept him alive and free. But there was something else there too, something that went deeper than simple self-preservation. The debt. The memory of a female flight medic jumping from a helicopter into hell to pull him out of a kill zone 15 years ago in Fallujah. "I'm in," Venom said quietly. "Not for the deal, not for the reduced charges, for her. Because she saved my life when she had every tactical reason to leave me behind, and I don't forget debts like that." Doc Morrison stood, shouldered his medical pack with the ease of someone half his age. "I'm in because someone has to keep you two from getting killed while you play hero. And because Agent Hale sounds like he needs a medic who knows what the hell he's doing." Song looked at Sarah, Captain Brennan. Sarah's hand moved unconsciously to her shoulder, to the spot where her Night Stalker tattoo marked her as part of a brotherhood that never quit and never left anyone behind. 5 years, she had been trying to leave that life behind, trying to be just a nurse, and just a mother, and just a normal civilian woman who saved lives with IVs instead of extraction helicopters. But normal women didn't break into motorcycle clubs with loaded weapons. Normal women didn't walk into cartel warehouses to rescue federal agents. Normal women didn't have the kind of training that turned a 42-year-old emergency room nurse into a tactical asset that the FBI was willing to use as an off-the-books distraction. She had never really left the military. She had just been waiting for a mission that mattered enough to pull her back in. "What equipment can you provide?" Sarah asked. Song gestured to a tactical officer who began laying out gear on the table. "Suppressed sidearms for all 3 of you. Night vision equipment. Tactical vests rated for pistol-caliber threats. Encrypted communications with direct line to my command frequency. Medical supplies beyond what Doc is already carrying. And this." The officer set down a small device that looked like a modified cell phone. "GPS tracker with panic button functionality. If things go sideways, if you need immediate extraction, you press this, and the Delta team comes in loud regardless of timeline. But understand that if you trigger this before we're ready, if you compromise the larger operation, there will be consequences." Sarah picked up the device, tested its weight, clipped it to her tactical vest. "Understood. What's the exfil plan if we succeed?" Song pulled up another map, this one showing terrain features around the warehouse. Quarter-mile north there's an abandoned construction site. Flat concrete pad that used to be foundation for a strip mall that never got built. It's large enough and clear enough to serve as helicopter landing zone. I can have a civilian medical transport on standby. You get Hale to that LZ and the bird will extract you. "And if we don't make it to the LZ?" Sarah asked. "Then the Delta team secures the warehouse, recovers whatever remains they find, and we all pretend this conversation never happened." Song's face was hard. "I'm not going to lie to you, Captain. The odds of you 3 pulling this off are poor. The odds of you doing it without casualties are worse. But you're the best chance Agent Hale has, and sometimes poor odds are all we get." Sarah checked her watch. 0237. They had 83 minutes before Vega and his reinforcements arrived. 83 minutes to infiltrate a cartel stronghold, locate and extract an injured federal agent, and escape before superior numbers turned the operation from rescue to suicide. She had worked with worse margins, barely. The equipment loadout took 12 minutes. Sarah Field stripped and reassembled her assigned Glock, a newer model than the one she had trained with but close enough that muscle memory would compensate. The suppressor added 3 inches to the barrel length, but the weight balance was acceptable. Ammunition was Federal HSD, the good stuff that expanded reliably and put targets down without overpenetration. Venom handled his weapon with the casual competence of someone who had been around firearms his entire adult life. Doc's hands moved slower but no less sure, checking his medical kit with the methodical precision of someone who had learned that missing supplies in combat meant watching people die. Song walked them to a black SUV idling at the edge of the command post perimeter. Her face was carefully neutral, but Sarah could see the calculation behind her eyes, the cold math of acceptable losses and strategic gains. A driver in tactical gear sat behind the wheel, not making eye contact, just another operator following orders. "One more thing," Song said before they climbed into the vehicle. "Ramon Vega, he's not just cartel muscle. Intelligence suggests he has military training, possibly Mexican special forces before he went private sector. He's smart, he's ruthless, and he has a personal vendetta against anyone connected to American law enforcement. If you encounter him, do not attempt to engage. Get hail and get out." "What kind of personal vendetta?" Sarah asked. Song hesitated. 12 years ago, CIA conducted a raid on a cartel compound in Kandahar. They were investigating connections between Taliban opium production and Mexican distribution networks. The raid was successful. 3 high-value targets eliminated, significant intelligence recovered. But the operation had collateral damage. Vega's older brother was one of the casualties. Sarah felt ice water flow through her veins. Kandahar, 12 years ago. She had been in Kandahar 12 years ago, flying medevac missions, treating wounded from raids and ambushes, and the daily grinding violence of a war that never seemed to end. "What month?" Sarah asked quietly. "November." "Why?" "Because I was there." Sarah's voice came out flat. "November 2012. I treated a CIA contractor who had been wounded during a compound raid. Gunshot wound to the abdomen, sucking chest wound, fractured skull. I kept him alive long enough to reach the field hospital. He survived and provided intelligence that led to multiple cartel arrests." Song's face went very still. Rafael Vega, Ramon's brother. He was one of the targets killed in that raid. The CIA contractor you saved was the asset who provided the intelligence that made the raid possible. "So Ramon Vega has been looking for the medic who saved the man who helped kill his brother," Sarah said. "And now his people have captured a federal agent who probably knows exactly who I am and where to find me." Song nodded slowly. Agent Hale's file would have contained information about his military contacts. If the cartel has been torturing him for information about federal witness protection, they've probably also been asking about anyone who might try to rescue him. Your name would be on that list. Venom swore quietly. "So this isn't just a rescue operation. This is walking into a trap specifically designed to catch her." Doc Morrison's weathered face creased with concern. "Ma'am, maybe we should reconsider. If Vega knows you're coming, if he's been waiting 12 years for revenge, this whole thing could be an elaborate ambush." Sarah looked at the 3 of them, then at the warehouse visible in the distance, a dark shape against the slightly less dark sky of pre-dawn. Jim Hale was in there. Jim who had taught her how to survive in combat. Jim who had pulled her out of a crashed helicopter in Fallujah while insurgents tried to kill them both. Jim who had saved her life as many times as she had saved his. "He would come for me," Sarah said simply. "If I was the one being tortured in that basement, Jim would walk through hell itself to get me out. I'm not leaving him there just because the odds are bad and the enemy knows I'm coming." She climbed into the SUV. Venom and Doc exchanged a glance, then followed. Song leaned in through the open door. 0500 hours. That's your window. Delta Team breaches whether you're clear or not. I can't hold them back longer than that without compromising the entire operation." "Understood," Sarah replied. The door closed. The SUV pulled away from the command post and accelerated into the darkness. They drove in silence for the first few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts about what was coming. Sarah used the time to run through mental checklists, the kind of pre-mission ritual that had kept her alive through 9 combat tour. Weapon condition, ammunition count, Equipment function. Objective clear. Exfil route confirmed. Accept the things you can't control and focus on the things you can. The driver spoke without turning around, his voice flat and professional. Dropping you at Rally Point Delta, quarter-mile south of target. Recommend approach from east where terrain provides natural concealment. Security patrol pattern suggests 8-minute gaps between passes on the eastern perimeter. Sarah pulled up the tactical overlay on her phone, studied the approach route. How current is the patrol pattern intel? 30 minutes old. Drone surveillance has been continuous since 2200 hours. Good enough. Sarah looked at Venom and Doc. We go in quiet. Suppressed weapons only unless absolutely necessary. Every gunshot is a dinner bell telling them where we are. Our advantage is speed and surprise. We hit fast, we grab hail, we disappear before they can coordinate a response. And if we run into Vega, Venom asked. We go through him if we have to, Sarah replied. But the priority is hail. Everything else is secondary. The SUV slowed, pulled off the main road onto what looked like an abandoned access path. The driver killed the headlights, navigated by ambient starlight and what looked like night vision equipment mounted to his helmet. They rolled to a stop behind a cluster of desert scrub that provided concealment from the road. Rally Point Delta, the driver announced. I'll maintain position here for 60 minutes. After that, I have orders to extract whether you've returned or not. Sarah, Venom, and Doc exited the vehicle. The November desert air was cold enough to see breath, dry enough to feel it pulling moisture from exposed skin. The warehouse was visible in the distance, maybe 400 meters across open ground that offered minimal cover. Sarah activated her night vision equipment, watched the world shift into shades of green and black. Venom and Doc did the same. They moved out in a tactical column, Sarah on point, Venom covering their six, Doc in the middle where his slower pace wouldn't compromise their approach. The terrain was classic high desert scrub. Low vegetation, scattered rocks, the occasional arroyo cut by flash floods that came once a decade and carved temporary rivers through the hardpan. Sarah picked their route carefully, using every bit of concealment the landscape offered, moving in the gaps between clear sight lines from the warehouse. They covered the first 200 meters in 15 minutes without incident. Then, Sarah's raised fist brought them to a halt. She had spotted thermal signatures ahead, two shapes moving in a patrol pattern that would intersect their approach vector in approximately 90 seconds. Hand signals. Venom acknowledged, moved to flank right. Sarah went left. Doc stayed low and motionless. The patrol was sloppy. Two Cartel soldiers talking loudly enough that Sarah could hear them from 30 meters away. They were complaining about the cold, about being stuck on overnight guard duty, about wanting to be inside when Vega arrived so they could watch whatever was going to happen to the federal agent in the basement. Sarah waited until they were 10 meters from her position. Then she moved. The first soldier never saw her coming. Sarah emerged from the darkness like a ghost, one hand clamping over his mouth, while the other applied a carotid restraint that cut blood flow to his brain. He struggled for perhaps 3 seconds before going limp. Sarah lowered him silently to the ground, used zip ties from her vest to secure his hands and feet, stuffed a cloth gag in his mouth. The second soldier had just enough time to register that his partner had disappeared before Venom's arm wrapped around his throat from behind. Same technique, same result. Unconscious in seconds, restrained and gagged in 10 more. Sarah checked both soldiers for radios, weapons, anything useful. She found encrypted walkie-talkies that wouldn't help them without the correct frequencies, and a key card that looked like it might open electronic locks. She pocketed the key card. Doc appeared from the shadows, Both alive. Both alive, Sarah confirmed. They'll have headaches and some bruising, but they'll wake up in an hour or two, by which time we'll either be long gone or dead. You have a real gift for optimism, ma'am, Doc observed. They continued their approach. The warehouse loomed larger now, its concrete walls stained with rust and neglect, its windows either broken or covered with sheets of plywood. The loading dock on the south side was lit by harsh sodium vapor lights that created pools of illumination surrounded by deep shadow. 3 vehicles were parked there, expensive SUVs with tinted windows that screamed cartel money. Sarah circled wide, bringing them around to the east side of the building where the terrain rose slightly, and a dry creek bed offered a natural approach route. The roof access she had spotted on the blueprints was a metal ladder bolted to the exterior wall, leading up 3 stories to a hatch that should have been alarmed, but might not be if cartel arrogance had made them sloppy about maintenance. She tested the ladder carefully. The metal was old but solid, no rust damage that would make it structurally unsound. The rungs were spaced for someone taller than her 5'6" frame, but manageable. "I'll go first," Sarah whispered. "Venom, you follow. Doc, you come up last and slow. Take your time and don't rush. We need you functional when we find Hale." "Copy that," Doc breathed. Sarah began to climb. The ladder was exposed, completely visible to anyone who happened to look in the right direction from the right angle. But it was 3 in the morning, and human beings were fundamentally diurnal creatures. Guard duty at this hour meant fighting biology and boredom, and both of those fights led to inattention. She reached the roof, paused at the top to scan for threats. Nothing. The roof was flat concrete covered in gravel and old tar paper, dotted with HVAC units that hadn't worked in years. The access hatch was exactly where the blueprints showed it, a metal square with a simple paddle latch. Sarah tested the latch. Unlocked. Either incredibly sloppy security or a trap. She exchanged glances with Venom, who had just reached the roof behind her. He shrugged, conveyed with that simple gesture that they were committed now. That second guessing would just waste time they didn't have. Doc reached the top, breathing hard but steady. He gave a thumbs up. Sarah lifted the hatch slowly, listening for any sound that would indicate immediate threat on the other side. Nothing but the ambient noise of a building that had been empty for years before violence moved in and made it home. She dropped through the hatch into darkness, her suppressed Glock up and tracking, her night vision painting the world in monochrome clarity. She was in what looked like an old administrative office area on the top floor. Desks pushed against walls, filing cabinets tipped over, the detritus of abandonment and decay. Venom came through the hatch next, then Doc. They stacked up at the doorway leading to the interior stairs, listening for sounds of movement below. Voices carried up from the ground floor. Spanish. Multiple speakers. Sarah's fluency wasn't perfect, but she caught enough to understand they were talking about Vega's pending arrival, about making sure everything was ready, about hoping the federal agent had some information left to give before he died. Sarah led them down the stairs, each step placed with the careful silence of people who understood that noise meant death. The second floor was similar to the third, abandoned offices and storage rooms. But the first floor was where the cartel had set up shop. She could see it through gaps in the floorboards. Lights, movement, armed men moving with the casual confidence of people who owned the space and didn't expect trouble. Sarah counted quickly. 6 visible on the main floor. That matched the thermal imaging, which meant the other 2 guards were probably stationed outside the basement access. The basement where Jim Hale was dying by degrees, while they tortured him for information. Sarah's encrypted phone vibrated silently. Text from Agent Song. Vega convoy ahead of schedule. ETA 20 minutes. Recommend abort if not already inside. 20 minutes instead of 80. The window was collapsing. Sarah typed back, inside, proceeding to objective. She led her team to a maintenance stairwell that should bypass the main floor and lead directly to the basement. Should being the critical word. Buildings never matched blueprints perfectly, and 15 years of cartel modifications could have changed everything. The stairwell door was locked, but the key card she had taken from the patrol guard worked. Sometimes you got lucky. The door opened silently on hinges that someone had recently oiled. They descended into darkness that even night vision struggled to penetrate. The air grew colder, damper, carrying smells that made Doc's weathered face tighten with recognition. Blood, urine, the distinctive copper tang of someone losing fluids their body couldn't spare. The basement corridor was concrete and shadows. A single bare bulb burned at the far end, illuminating a door with 2 guards stationed outside. Big men with automatic weapons held with the comfortable familiarity that said they knew how to use them. Sarah calculated angles and odds. 2 guards, 3 attackers. The guards had superior firepower, but Sarah's team had surprise and training. In a straight fight, the outcome was maybe 60-40 in their favor. But gunfire would bring every cartel soldier in the building running, would turn extraction into a shooting gallery where mathematics and ammunition would grind them down. She needed a distraction, something to pull one or both guards away from that door long enough to thin the odds. Her hand moved to her vest, to the small collection of tools and tricks that combat medics learn to carry. Flashbang grenades for stunning attackers, smoke grenades for concealment, and one thermite grenade that she had grabbed from Song's equipment table on pure instinct. Thermite burned at 4,000 degrees. It would melt through steel, through concrete, through damn near anything. It also created a lot of smoke and light and noise. She showed the thermite grenade to Venom and Doc, pointed to a cluster of old machinery at the opposite end of the corridor from the guarded door, made a throwing gesture. Venom's eyes widened, but he nodded understanding. Create chaos at one end of the corridor and hope the guards abandoned their post to investigate. Sarah pulled the pin, counted 3 seconds for the fuse, and threw. The grenade arced through the darkness and landed exactly where she aimed, behind a collection of old conveyor equipment that would contain the blast and focus the light. The thermite ignited with a white phosphorus brilliance that overloaded night vision equipment. Sarah ripped her goggles off just as both guards shouted in alarm and ran toward the unexpected fire that was now melting through machinery and starting to consume wooden pallets stacked nearby. Sarah, Venom, and Doc ran the opposite direction, toward the now unguarded door. Sarah hit it with her shoulder, the old wood splintering around a lock that hadn't been maintained in years. The door crashed inward, and she rolled through into a room that smelled like hell and suffering. James Hale was strapped to a metal chair in the center of the room, what was left of him. His face was swollen beyond recognition, one eye completely closed, the other barely open. Burns covered his arms and chest. His fingers were bent at angles that meant broken bones. Blood pooled on the concrete floor beneath him. But he was alive, barely. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths that bubbled wetly. Doc was already moving, his medic instincts overriding everything else. He dropped his pack, pulled out IV supplies, began assessment with hands that had done this same dance 1,000 times in worse conditions. Pulse thready, breathing labored, multiple burn sites, probable broken ribs, definite dehydration. Doc's voice was clinical even as his hands worked with desperate speed. I need 5 minutes to stabilize him for transport. We don't have 5 minutes, Venom said from where he had taken up position at the door. He could hear shouts from the corridor. the guards realizing the thermite fire was a distraction and racing back toward their post. "Take 3, Sarah said. "Do what you have to do to keep him alive until we reach the extraction point. Everything else can wait." Doc nodded, already inserting an IV line into Hale's arm with practiced efficiency. Hale's one good eye focused on Sarah's face. Recognition flickered there despite the pain and trauma. "Sarah," he whispered. His voice was a ruined rasp. "Knew you'd come. Told them. Told them the ghost doesn't leave people behind." "Save your strength, Jim." Sarah's hand found his, squeezed gently. "We're getting you out." "Trap," Hale managed. "Vega knows. He's been waiting. Wants you alive. Something about his brother." "I know," Sarah said. "And I don't care. You're walking out of here even if I have to carry you." The door exploded inward. Not from the corridor they had entered through, but from another door on the opposite side of the room that Sarah hadn't even noticed in the darkness and chaos. 4 cartel soldiers poured through, weapons up and firing. Sarah threw herself sideways, rolled behind the metal chair where Hale was strapped, used his body as cover in a calculation that was pure tactical necessity and felt like betrayal even as she did it. Bullets sparked off concrete and metal. Venom returned fire from the doorway, his suppressed Glock coughing quietly but effectively. 1 soldier went down. 2. But more were coming. Sarah could hear them in the corridor, shouting coordinates and organizing a response. The window for quiet extraction was gone. Now it was just about survival. Doc had Hale's restraints cut, was trying to lift him from the chair. The federal agent couldn't support his own weight, his legs buckling the moment he tried to stand. Doc caught him, took the full weight across his shoulders in a fireman's carry that should have been impossible for a 67-year-old man, but combat made you capable of impossible things. "We need to move," Doc shouted, "now." The corridor was chaos. The thermite grenade had set actual fires now, smoke filling the basement level, alarms blaring. The 2 original guards were dead, shot by responding soldiers who hadn't bothered to check targets before firing. More cartel soldiers were pouring down the stairs from the main floor. Sarah led them away from the main response, deeper into the basement where blueprints showed a service tunnel that used to connect the meatpacking plant to a separate cold storage facility. The tunnel might be collapsed. It might be sealed. But it was their only option that didn't involve fighting through a dozen armed men. She found the tunnel entrance behind a stack of old pallets. The metal door was rusted but not locked. It opened with a shriek of protesting hinges that echoed through the basement like a declaration of position. The tunnel beyond was darkness and dripping water and the smell of rot. Sarah's night vision showed a concrete tube that stretched maybe 200 feet before terminating in what looked like another door or possibly a collapse. No way to know until they reached it. Doc carried Hale into the tunnel. Venom backed in last, laying down suppressive fire that bought them maybe 30 seconds before pursuit organized and followed. They ran through the darkness, Doc's breathing labored under Hale's weight, Sarah clearing corners and potential ambush points, Venom watching their back trail where flashlight beams were beginning to probe into the tunnel. The far end was blocked. Not collapsed, thankfully, but chained shut from the outside. Sarah's bolt cutters made short work of the chain, but the door itself was stuck, warped in its frame from years of neglect. Behind them, gunfire erupted as cartel soldiers spotted them in the tunnel. Bullets ricocheted off concrete, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Sarah and Venom hit the door together, shoulders driving into corroded metal. It gave, slowly, grudgingly. 6 inches, a foot, enough for Doc to squeeze through with his burden, enough for Sarah to follow. Venom was the last one through, bullets chasing him into the cold night air. They emerged in what had been the cold storage facility, Now just an empty concrete shell open to the sky where the roof had collapsed decades ago. And waiting in that open space, illuminated by headlights from 3 SUVs arranged in a semicircle, was Ramon Vega. He stood 6 feet tall, expensive suit, somehow immaculate despite the desert dust and pre-dawn chill. His face was all sharp angles and cold intelligence. Flanking him were maybe 15 soldiers, all armed, all tracking Sarah's team with weapons that meant there was no winning this fight. Sarah raised her Glock anyway, futile but necessary. Beside her, Venom did the same. Doc lowered Hale to the ground as gently as combat allowed and pulled his own weapon. Ramon Vega smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Captain Sarah Brennan, 12 years I've been looking for you. 12 years of following leads and bribing informants and searching through military medical records for the flight medic who saved the CIA asset that got my brother killed. He walked forward slowly, confident in his numerical superiority. My brother Raphael was a good man, a soldier who served Mexico with honor. The CIA corrupted him, turned him into an informant, used him until he was no longer useful. Then they discarded him in a raid that killed 17 people. Your brother was trafficking heroin, Sarah replied. He was using military supply chains to smuggle drugs into the United States. The raid stopped that operation and saved lives. The raid murdered my family, Vega countered. And you, Captain, you saved the man who betrayed us. You kept him alive when he should have died. You created the witness whose testimony destroyed everything my brother built. I was a medic, Sarah said. I saved everyone I could. That was my job. And this is mine, Vega replied. He gestured to his men. Take them alive. All of them. The woman I want personally. The others can watch what happens to federal agents who cross the Sinaloa cartel. The soldiers began to advance. Sarah calculated ranges and ammunition and the cold mathematical certainty that they were about to die. Her finger tightened on the trigger. She would take as many as she could before they brought her down. Then the sky erupted with sound and fury. The Delta Force helicopters came in low and fast, their approach masked by terrain until the last possible second. Spotlights blazed to life, turning night into noon. Heavy weapons opened up, 50 caliber rounds chewing through the SUVs and forcing Vega's men to scatter for cover. Agent Song's voice crackled through Sarah's earpiece. Change of plans, Captain. When you triggered that thermite grenade, our thermal imaging lit up like Christmas. We moved the timeline. Hope you don't mind the early extraction. Ropes dropped from the helicopters. Delta operators fast roped down, hitting the ground in full tactical gear and immediately establishing a perimeter. The cartel soldiers found themselves suddenly outnumbered and outgunned by some of the most elite fighters in the world. Ramon Vega was running, sprinting toward one of the few vehicles that hadn't been shredded by 50 cal fire. Sarah made a decision in the space between heartbeats. She could get on that helicopter with Jim Hale and Doc and Venom and escape clean, or she could end this now. She ran after Vega. Venom shouted something behind her, but Sarah was already committed, already closing the distance with the cartel commander who had spent 12 years hunting her. Vega reached his vehicle, yanked the door open. Sarah was 5 steps behind him. He spun, pistol coming up faster than she expected. Sarah dove left as his shot split the air where her head had been. She rolled, came up firing. Her round sparked off the vehicle's armored panels. Vega ducked inside, engine roaring to life. The SUV accelerated toward a gap in the Delta perimeter. Sarah ran after it, knowing she couldn't catch it, couldn't stop it. 12 years of vendetta escaping into the desert night. Then Venom's motorcycle appeared from nowhere, the big Harley roaring across the open ground. He pulled alongside Vega's SUV, matched speed, then did something absolutely insane. He jumped from the moving bike onto the SUV's hood. The bike crashed and tumbled. Venom held onto hood ornaments and windshield wipers, while Vega swerved violently trying to throw him off. The SUV clipped a concrete barrier, sending it into a spin that ended when it slammed into the collapsed wall of the cold storage building. Sarah reached the wreck 10 seconds later. Venom was pulling himself from the crumpled hood, bleeding from a dozen cuts but alive. Vega was slumped over the steering wheel, airbag deployed, conscious but dazed. Sarah yanked the driver's door open, pressed her Glock against Vega's temple. "For my brother," Vega slurred through split lips. "Everything I did was for Raphael." "And everything I did was to save lives," Sarah replied, "including the life of the man who stopped your brother from killing thousands with his poison. I don't regret that. I'd do it again." "Then kill me," Vega said. "Finish it." Sarah's finger rested on the trigger. It would be easy, justified. This man had tortured Jim Hale, had tried to kill her son Marcus, had spent 12 years planning revenge for a death he should have blamed on his brother's choices instead of on a medic who had been doing her job. But Sarah Brennan was a medic. Her oath was to preserve life, not take it, even when the person in front of her deserved death by any reasonable measure. She lowered the weapon. Delta team operators were already surrounding the vehicle, weapons trained, shouting commands. Sarah stepped back, let them take custody of Ramon Vega, watched as they zip-tied his hands and dragged him from the wreckage. Venom limped over, his leather vest torn and bloodied. "You could have killed him." "I could have," Sarah agreed, "but then I'd be no better than he is." The helicopter designated for medical evacuation touched down 50 meters away. Delta medics were already loading Jim Hale onto a stretcher, Doc Morrison beside them providing handoff reports about treatment and vitals and urgent care requirements. Sarah walked to the stretcher. Hale's one good eye tracked her movement. His ruined hand reached out, found hers. "Told you," he whispered, "Ghost doesn't quit." "Never," Sarah replied. "Night Stalkers don't quit, you taught me that." The medics loaded Hale into the helicopter. Doc climbed in with him, unwilling to let his patient out of his sight. The crew chief waved at Sarah and Venom. "Room for 2 more if you're coming." Sarah looked at Venom, the man who had been her enemy an hour ago, who had jumped onto a moving vehicle to stop a cartel commander from escaping, who had proven that debts of honor still meant something even in a world gone dark and violent. "Thank you," she said simply. Venom touched the spot on his lower back where her stitches had saved his life 15 years ago in Fallujah. "That makes us even. Maybe. Ask me again when I'm not bleeding from a dozen cuts." They climbed aboard the helicopter. As it lifted off, Sarah looked down at the chaos below. Delta operators securing the warehouse, FBI agents processing the scene, Ramon Vega being loaded into an armored vehicle that would take him to a cell where he would spend the rest of his life. The operation was over. Jim was alive. Marcus was safe. The debt had been paid. But as the helicopter banked toward the rising sun, as El Paso spread out below them like a circuit board of lights and shadow, Sarah knew that something fundamental had changed. She had spent 5 years trying to leave the warrior behind and become just a healer. But tonight had proven that she could be both. That sometimes the highest form of healing was the willingness to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. The helicopter touched down at a military hospital 40 minutes later. Jim Hale was rushed into surgery. Doc Morrison, despite his age and exhaustion, insisted on scrubbing in to assist. Venom was taken for his own medical evaluation, his various cuts and bruises more impressive than life-threatening. Sarah found herself in a waiting room with bad coffee and worse television. Agent Song appeared an hour later, looking tired but satisfied. Vega is in federal custody. We recovered files from the warehouse linking him to 17 murders, multiple drug trafficking operations, and conspiracy charges that will put him away for life. Song sat down beside Sarah. "You did good work tonight, Captain." "I broke about a dozen laws and got lucky," Sarah replied. "Sometimes that's what good work looks like." Song pulled out a folder. "I wanted to talk to you about something. The operation you ran tonight, the way you infiltrated that warehouse and extracted an agent under impossible conditions, that's the kind of capability the government needs. We're establishing a program, Guardian Protocol, protecting families of federal witnesses who are at risk from cartel retaliation." Sarah looked up sharply. "I'm a nurse, not a soldier anymore." "You're whatever the situation requires you to be," Song corrected. "Tonight you were a tactical operator. Tomorrow you could be saving lives in an ER. The point is having people with your skills and experience available when traditional law enforcement isn't enough." Sarah thought about Marcus in that hospital bed, shot because he witnessed a murder. Thought about all the other families caught in crossfires they never asked to be part of. Thought about Jim Hale tortured for doing his job. "What would this Guardian Protocol look like?" she asked. "Small teams, veterans with combat experience and medical training, off-the-books operations when needed, fully authorized when possible. You'd have autonomy to build the program the way you think it should work." Song pulled out a contract. "It's not traditional military service, more like consultant status with federal backing, but it would let you use your skills to protect people who need protecting." Sarah took the contract, scanned the terms. It was everything Song had described: legal authority, federal resources, the ability to act when bureaucracy would mean people died. "I need to talk to my son first," Sarah said. "Make sure he's okay with having a mother who might disappear into dangerous situations." Song nodded. "Take your time. The offer stands whenever you're ready." After Song left, Sarah walked to the surgical wing where Jim Hale was in recovery. The doctors said he would live. Months of physical therapy ahead. Permanent damage to one eye and 2 fingers, but alive. She sat beside his bed and waited for him to wake up. When he did, his one good eye focused on her face and he smiled despite the pain. "You came," he said, "just like Fallujah." "Just like Fallujah," Sarah confirmed, "and I'd do it again." They sat in comfortable silence, 2 soldiers who had been to hell and back together, who understood the price of service and the cost of keeping faith with people who depended on you. Finally Hale spoke again. "Song talked to you about the program." "She did." "You going to take it?" Sarah thought about Marcus, grown now and choosing his own path. Thought about all the years she had spent trying to be normal when normal had never fit her quite right. Thought about the Night Stalker tattoo on her shoulder and the oath she had taken and never really stopped honoring. "I think I might," she said. "Someone has to look out for the people who fall through the cracks. Might as well be someone who knows what she's doing." Hale's smile widened despite the pain. "Ghost doesn't quit." "Never," Sarah replied. Outside the hospital window, the sun was rising over El Paso. A new day, a new mission. The same old promise that Sarah Brennan had been keeping since the first time she climbed into a helicopter and flew into fire to pull out the wounded. No one gets left behind, not on her watch, not ever. The war was over, but the Guardians' work was just beginning. 6 months after the warehouse operation that nearly killed them all, Sarah Brennan stood in front of a converted industrial building in downtown El Paso that wore its new purpose like an ill-fitting suit. The sign above the door read Guardian Protocol in clean sans serif letters that somehow managed to look both official and deliberately forgettable. The kind of sign that people would walk past every day without really seeing, which was exactly the point. Inside, the former warehouse had been transformed into something between a tactical operations center and a medical clinic. Banks of computers along one wall monitoring federal witness protection cases flagged as high risk. A fully equipped trauma bay that would have made most emergency rooms jealous. A small armory behind reinforced doors. Living quarters for team members who might need to stay on site during active operations. And a conference room with a large table where Sarah now gathered her team for their weekly briefing. Doc Morrison sat at that table now, looking remarkably healthy for a man who had fast-roped from a helicopter and carried a wounded federal agent through a cartel stronghold at age 67. The various cuts and bruises from the Vega operation had healed into stories he would probably never tell anyone outside this room. He was reviewing medical supply inventories with the methodical care of someone who had learned that missing equipment in combat meant watching people die. Victor Castellano, no longer called Venom by anyone except his former club members, occupied the chair at the far end of the table. His cooperation in rescuing Agent Hale had earned him a deal with federal prosecutors. 2 years in minimum security followed by 5 years supervised release, all of it suspended as long as he continued working with the Guardian Protocol. He had skills the program needed, connections in places the government couldn't officially reach, and a debt to Sarah that he seemed determined to repay by making himself indispensable. Agent Rebecca Song attended via video conference, her face on the large monitor looking tired but satisfied. The Vega prosecution had made her career. Ramon Vega himself was serving life without parole in a supermax facility, where he would spend 23 hours a day in a concrete box thinking about the brother he had lost and the revenge that had destroyed him. The Sinaloa cartel's operations in the Southwest had been significantly disrupted. Dozens of arrests. Millions in seized assets. It was the kind of victory that got people promoted. And then there was Marcus Brennan, sitting beside his mother looking uncomfortable in the tactical vest that Sarah had insisted he wear for this briefing. At 20 years old, he was taller than Sarah remembered, his face carrying a hardness that came from being shot and tortured and learning that the world was more dangerous than college campuses and pre-med textbooks suggested. The wound in his shoulder had healed cleanly, leaving only a puckered scar that he touched sometimes when he thought no one was watching. Sarah called the meeting to order. Status report on the Phoenix operation. Doc looked up from his inventory sheets. The Rodriguez family is settled in their new location. Mother and 2 children, ages 8 and 10. We extracted them 48 hours ahead of the cartel hit squad that came looking. FBI arrested 3 men at the family's old address. The kids are enrolled in new schools under their new identities. Mother has a job lined up at a hospital in Denver. They're as safe as we can make them. How did they handle the transition? Sarah asked. Doc's weathered face softened slightly. Kids are resilient, scared but adapting. Mother is struggling more, keeps asking if she did the right thing, testifying if putting her family through this was worth it. I told her the same thing I tell them all. The people she testified against killed 17 people. Her testimony stopped them from killing more. That matters. Sarah nodded. It was a conversation she had heard variations of a dozen times now. People who did the right thing, who spoke truth to power, who became targets because they refused to stay silent. The Guardian Protocol existed for them, for the families who fell through the cracks between law enforcement's limited resources and the cartel's unlimited willingness to kill anyone who threatened their operations. Victor spoke up from his end of the table. I've got intel from my former club contacts. The Sinaloa cartel is reorganizing after Vega's arrest. New leadership is being more careful, more selective about who they target. Word on the street is they're afraid of drawing Guardian Protocol attention. They know what happened to Vega and they don't want the same heat. That's good news in the short term, Song said from the monitor. But it also means they're adapting, getting smarter. Eventually, someone is going to test you, going to push back against this program to see if it's real or just smoke and mirrors. Let them test us, Sarah replied. We'll show them the same thing we showed Vega. Nobody gets left behind, not on our watch. The briefing continued for another 30 minutes, covering ongoing cases and potential threats and the administrative minutiae that came with running an off-the-books federal program. When it ended, the team dispersed to their various duties. Doc to his medical supplies, Victor to his intelligence gathering, Song to whatever FBI business filled her days. Marcus lingered, clearly wanting to say something but not quite ready to commit. Sarah waited, giving him space. 6 months ago, he had been a kid who fixed cars and dreamed about medical school. Now he was a witness who had testified against a cartel commander, who had spent 3 days on a witness stand describing torture and murder, while Ramon Vega stared at him with eyes that promised death. The trial had changed Marcus, made him harder, more cautious, but also more determined. "Mom," he said finally, "I've been thinking about the medical school applications." Sarah felt something tighten in her chest. Marcus had deferred his enrollment after the shooting, had spent the past 6 months healing and testifying and trying to figure out what came next. Medical school had always been his dream, the path he had planned since he was 12 years old and first understood that his mother saved lives. "You should apply," Sarah said. "You've got the grades and the test scores. Any school would be lucky to have you." Marcus shook his head. "That's not what I mean. I'm still going to apply, still going to go, but I want to specialize differently than I planned." "How so?" Marcus touched his shoulder scar, the unconscious gesture that meant he was thinking about the night that changed everything. "I always thought I'd do cardiology or maybe oncology, prestigious specialties where you help people with complex diseases. But after everything that happened, after watching you and Doc work under impossible conditions, I think I want to do what you did. Combat medicine, trauma surgery. The kind of medicine where seconds matter and you don't have time for anything except keeping people alive." Sarah felt pride and fear war in her chest. Pride that her son wanted to follow her path. Fear of what that path would cost him. She had seen too many young medics burn out or break down or develop the kind of 1,000-yard stare that came from watching people die despite your best efforts. "That's a hard road," she said carefully. "Trauma medicine will take everything you have and ask for more." "I know," Marcus replied, "but it's the medicine that matters most. The difference between someone living or dying. That's what I want to do, make that difference." Sarah pulled him into a hug, felt how much taller he was now, how much he had grown in ways that had nothing to do with height. "Your father would be proud," she said. "I'm proud." They stood like that for a moment, mother and son, both of them carrying scars from a war they had never asked to fight. Then Marcus pulled back, wiped his eyes quickly like he was embarrassed by the emotion. "There's something else," he said, "the Guardian Protocol. You're building something important here, something that saves families like ours. I want to help. Not full-time, I've still got school, but part-time, however I can contribute." Sarah studied his face. "You've already done enough, Marcus. You testified. You helped put Vega away. You don't owe this program anything more." "It's not about owing," Marcus countered. "It's about being part of something that matters. You taught me that. Dad taught you that. Service doesn't end just because the mission is over. It's a choice you make every day to stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves." Sarah felt her throat tighten. When had her little boy become this man who understood duty and service and sacrifice? When had he stopped needing her protection and started offering his own strength to protect others? "All right," she said, "you can help, but you follow Doc's orders when it comes to medical work, and you follow mine when it comes to security protocols. And the moment I think it's interfering with your education, the moment your grades slip or your focus wavers, we have this conversation again. Deal." "Deal," Marcus agreed. They shook hands like colleagues instead of family, formalizing something that felt both momentous and inevitable. Marcus headed out to start whatever studying consumed his evenings now. Sarah watched him go, then turned to find Doc Morrison standing in the doorway. "He's a good kid," Doc observed. "He's turning into a good man," Sarah corrected. "Like his mother turned into a good leader." Doc walked into the conference room, settled into a chair with the careful movements of someone whose body remembered every hard landing and rough extraction. "You know, when I first met you at that motorcycle club, I thought you were just another desperate mother with more courage than sense. But watching you build this program, watching you lead this team, I realize I was wrong." "About what?" "About the desperate part. You weren't desperate, you were just doing what you've always done. Running toward the fire when everyone else is running away. That's not desperation, that's calling." Sarah sat down across from him. "Did you have a calling, Doc, before Vietnam and the motorcycle club and all of this?" Doc's weathered face creased with a smile that held 50 years of memories. "I wanted to be a teacher. History, maybe English. Thought I'd spend my life in a classroom helping kids understand the world. Then I got drafted. Ended up as a medic because I scored high on the aptitude tests. Spent 3 years in Vietnam putting kids back together after the world broke them." He paused, staring at something only he could see. "When I came home, I couldn't go back to wanting normal things. Couldn't imagine standing in front of a classroom teaching about the Civil War when I had friends who died in rice paddies. So I drifted. Did some paramedic work. Burned out. Joined the motorcycle club because at least bikers were honest about being broken." "What changed?" Sarah asked. "You did," Doc replied. "Walking into that club with a gun and a mission and absolutely no quit in you. Watching you fight for your son reminded me why I became a medic in the first place. Not because I wanted to. Because someone had to. Because leaving people to die when you have the skills to save them is a betrayal of everything that matters." He stood, moved toward the door, then paused. "Point is, ma'am, some people spend their whole lives looking for their calling. You've known yours since the first time you put on a uniform. Don't ever doubt that what you're building here matters. It does. More than you know." Doc left. Sarah sat alone in the conference room, surrounded by the tools and technology and systems she had built to turn one woman's desperate rescue mission into something bigger, something that would outlast any individual operation. Her encrypted phone buzzed. Message from Agent Song. "Urgent situation developing. Family in Tucson needs immediate extraction. Cartel hit squad en route. Can you respond?" Sarah looked around the empty conference room, at the maps and monitors and equipment that represented 6 months of tireless work. Thought about Marcus choosing trauma medicine. About Doc finding purpose again after 50 years of drifting. About Victor Castellano paying his debt by becoming something better than what he had been. She typed back, "Send coordinates. Guardian protocol is en route." 20 minutes later, Sarah's team assembled in the operations center. Doc with his medical kit. Victor with his intelligence briefings and tactical knowledge. 3 other veterans Sarah had recruited over the past months, men and women who understood combat and had skills the program needed. And Marcus, insisting on coming despite Sarah's objections, arguing that he needed to see how real operations worked if he was going to be useful. The situation in Tucson was ugly. A family of 5 parents and 3 children ages 6 to 14, all targeted because the father had testified about cartel money laundering through construction companies. The FBI had them in a safe house, but intelligence suggested the location had been compromised. A hit squad was inbound, maybe 2 hours away. The family needed to disappear before the killers arrived. Sarah laid out the plan. Simple extraction. 2 vehicles. Route to the safe house, load the family, drive them to a secondary location where federal marshals would take custody and move them into permanent witness protection. No shooting if possible. No heroics. Just get in, get the family, get out. The team loaded into 2 black SUVs, the kind that were common enough to blend into traffic, but armored enough to stop most small arms fire. Sarah drove the lead vehicle with Doc riding shotgun and Marcus in the back. Victor drove the second vehicle with the rest of the team. The drive to Tucson took 90 minutes through desert that looked peaceful in the afternoon sun. Scrub brush and distant mountains and sky so blue it hurt to look at. It was hard to imagine violence in landscape this beautiful. Hard to remember that cartels operated in this same desert, that people died here for the crime of telling the truth. They reached the safe house at 4:37 in the afternoon. Suburban neighborhood, middle-class homes with desert landscaping and 2-car garages. The kind of place where people raised families and worried about property values and never thought about cartel hit squads. Sarah approached the door, knocked the prearranged pattern that identified her as friendly. The door opened to reveal a U.S. Marshal who looked about 12 years old, all nervous energy and tactical gear that was probably worth more than his car. Guardian protocol, Sarah identified herself. We're here for the Mendoza family. The marshal checked credentials, then stepped aside. The family was gathered in the living room, surrounded by hastily packed suitcases and the terrified uncertainty that came from having your entire life uprooted because violent men wanted you dead. The father, Carlos Mendoza, was maybe 40, construction worker build and hands that showed years of hard labor. His wife Maria looked younger but carried the weight of keeping 3 frightened children calm while everything fell apart. The kids ranged from a 6-year-old girl clutching a stuffed rabbit to a 14-year-old boy trying to look brave and failing. Sarah knelt down to the children's level. My name is Sarah. I'm here to take you somewhere safe. This is Doc. She gestured to the old medic. He's going to make sure everyone stays healthy during the trip. And that's my son Marcus. He pointed to where Marcus stood in the doorway. He was scared once too, just like you, but he's safe now, and you will be too. The 6-year-old girl looked at Sarah with eyes too old for her age. Are the bad men coming? Not anymore, Sarah said with a confidence she didn't entirely feel. We're going to leave before they get here. You'll be safe. The extraction went smoothly at first. Load the family and their essential belongings into the vehicles. Brief Carlos and Maria on what would happen next, where they were going, how the Federal Witness Protection Program would give them new identities and a chance to start over somewhere the cartel couldn't find them. They were pulling out of the driveway when Victor's voice crackled over the radio. Contact. 2 vehicles approaching from the west, moving fast. Could be our hit squad ahead of schedule. Sarah made a split-second decision. Victor, take the family in your vehicle. Different route to the extraction point. I'll draw any pursuit. Negative, Victor replied. You've got Doc and your son with you. I should be the bait. That's an order, Sarah said. Protect the family, that's the mission. She watched in her rearview mirror as Victor's SUV peeled off onto a side street, heading for a secondary route they had planned as backup. Then she accelerated toward the approaching vehicles, ready to do whatever was necessary to keep the hit squad's attention on her instead of the family. The two approaching vehicles were expensive SUVs with tinted windows, exactly what cartel enforcers would drive. They spotted Sarah's vehicle, seemed to recognize it as connected to their target, and immediately gave chase. Sarah's driving instructor at Fort Rucker had been a former stock car racer who treated evasive driving like an art form. She had learned well. The SUV responded to her commands like an extension of her will, cornering hard through suburban streets, accelerating through gaps that should have been too small, using every bit of the vehicle's armored weight as an advantage. But the pursuers were good too, professional. They stayed on her tail through turns that should have lost them, matched her speed on straightaways, showed the kind of tactical coordination that came from training and experience. Doc was calling out positions, two vehicles still in pursuit, distance holding at 50 meters. They're trying to box you in at the next intersection. Sarah saw the trap forming. Two more vehicles emerging from side streets ahead, creating a four-vehicle perimeter that would pin her against a strip mall parking lot with nowhere to run. She made a decision that would have gotten her court-martialed in the military, but was exactly right for this situation. She drove straight at the roadblock, accelerated to 60 in a 35 zone, and at the last possible second, she yanked the wheel hard right and jumped the curb into the strip mall parking lot. The SUV's suspension screamed but held. She threaded between parked cars, sending shopping carts scattering, forcing pedestrians to dive for cover. The pursuing vehicles tried to follow, but they were a half-second too slow, their decision-making fractionally inferior. That half-second was all Sarah needed. She burst out the far side of the parking lot, smashed through a decorative fence that was more aesthetic than structural, and found herself on a service road that ran behind the commercial district. The pursuing vehicles were hung up in the parking lot, trying to navigate obstacles while Sarah opened up distance. Marcus's voice came from the back seat, steady despite the chaos. "Mom, are you trying to give me a heart attack?" Just demonstrating proper evasive driving technique, Sarah replied, allowing herself the briefest smile. "Pay attention. This might be on the test." Doc was on the radio coordinating with Victor. The family vehicle had reached the extraction point clean, no pursuit. Federal marshals were taking custody. The mission was successful. Sarah's radio crackled with a different voice. "Agent Song. Captain Brennan, I've got local law enforcement asking why there's a high-speed chase through Tucson suburbs. Please tell me you have a good explanation." "Armed cartel hit squad pursuing federal witness protection assets," Sarah replied. "We were conducting authorized extraction under Guardian Protocol authority." "Authorized by whom exactly?" Song asked. "Authorized by the part of your federal mandate that says protecting witness families is a priority," Sarah countered. "Would you prefer I had let the hit squad reach the safe house?" Song sighed. "No, but I'd prefer you didn't create situations that require me to spend 3 hours explaining to local cops why federal assets were conducting tactical operations in their jurisdiction. Get clear and return to El Paso. We'll debrief tomorrow." The pursuit had fallen away. Sarah made several more turns to confirm they were clean, then merged onto the interstate heading back toward El Paso. Adrenaline was fading now, leaving behind the shaky aftermath that came from close calls and tactical decisions made at 70 miles per hour. Marcus leaned forward from the back seat. "That was insane." "That was Tuesday," Doc corrected with a slight smile. Sarah caught her son's eye in the rearview mirror. "Still want to be part of this program? Still think this is how you want to spend your time?" Marcus nodded slowly. "More than ever. Because what you just did, what this team does, that's the difference between those kids having a future or being dead in a safe house. That matters, Mom. That's worth the risk." They drove in silence for a while, the desert scrolling past at 75 miles per hour, the sun beginning its descent toward evening. Sarah thought about the Mendoza family, about Carlos who had chosen to testify knowing it would destroy his life, about Maria who had supported that choice despite the cost, about 3 children who would grow up with new names in a new city, and hopefully never have to look over their shoulders wondering if today was the day the cartel found them. The Guardian Protocol had saved them, had made the difference between life and death, and there would be others, families like the Mendozas who needed protection that traditional law enforcement couldn't provide fast enough or thoroughly enough. That was the gap Sarah's program filled. The space between should be protected and actually staying alive. Back at the El Paso headquarters, the team gathered for a quick after-action review. The operation had been successful despite the unexpected pursuit. The Mendoza family was safe. Nobody on the Guardian team was injured beyond a few bruises from the rough driving. All weapons had been accounted for. All equipment had been recovered. By any objective measure, it was a textbook extraction. But Sarah could see the cost in her team's faces. The exhaustion that came from high-stress operations. The adrenaline crash that left people shaky and second-guessing every decision. The weight of responsibility that never quite went away even when missions succeeded. She dismissed the team early, told them to go home and rest and come back tomorrow ready to do it again. Because there would always be another family, another threat, another mission where failure meant innocent people died. Doc Morrison lingered after the others left. Sarah found him in the medical bay, restocking supplies with the obsessive thoroughness that characterized every aspect of his work. "You ever wonder if we're making a difference?" Doc asked without looking up. "Or are we just putting band-aids on a sucking chest wound?" Sarah considered the question. 6 months ago, I was an ER nurse who had convinced herself she could leave the warrior behind and just be a healer. Then my son got shot, and a man I respected was tortured, and I remembered that sometimes the highest form of healing is being willing to fight for people who can't fight for themselves. She picked up a medical kit, began helping Doc restock. "We're not going to defeat the cartels. We're not going to end corruption or stop violence or fix all the broken things in the world, but we can save families. We can give them a chance at life. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all any of us can do. Save the ones we can reach and trust that it matters." Doc nodded slowly. "In Vietnam, I used to have this nightmare. I'd be in a field hospital and wounded would keep coming in faster than we could treat them. No matter how hard we worked, no matter how many we saved, there were always more. I'd wake up feeling like nothing I did mattered because I couldn't save them all." He looked at Sarah directly. "Working with you these past months, running operations where we actually get to people before they're casualties instead of after, that's been healing in a way I didn't expect. You've given me something I lost in that war. The feeling that individual lives matter, that saving one person is worth whatever it costs." "Thank you for saying that," Sarah replied quietly. "Thank you for letting an old medic prove he's not done serving yet," Doc countered. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the office that Agent Song had arranged for her in the federal building. The Guardian Protocol had evolved from off-the-books experiment to semi-official program with actual budget and legal authority. Sarah had a staff of 8 full-time operators now, all veterans with combat experience and specialized skills. They had successfully protected 14 families in the past quarter. 0 casualties among protected witnesses. 0 compromise of new identities. Song entered without knocking, a habit that Sarah had learned to accept. The FBI agent looked different these days. Less stressed, more confident. The Vega prosecution had made her a rising star in the Bureau, and she had leveraged that success into expanding resources for programs like Guardian Protocol. I've got good news and complicated news, Song announced. Which do you want first? Always start with good news, Sarah replied. Congress approved funding for Guardian Protocol expansion. We're authorized to open satellite operations in Phoenix, Albuquerque, and San Antonio. You'll have regional teams covering the entire Southwest corridor. It's everything we talked about when we started this. Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction. 3 more teams meant dozens more families protected, hundreds of lives saved, the mission scaling to match the need. What's the complicated news? Song sat down, her expression shifting to something more serious. Ramon Vega. He's in Supermax, but he's not isolated. Prison intelligence suggests he's been communicating with cartel leadership, coordinating operations from inside. And we've intercepted chatter suggesting there might be a contract on you specifically. Sarah processed that information with the calm that came from years of knowing people wanted her dead. How credible is the threat? Credible enough that I'm recommending enhanced security protocols, varied routes to work, counter-surveillance training for Marcus, maybe even consider relocating for a few months until things cool down. No, Sarah said flatly. I'm not running. I'm not changing my life because Vega is throwing a tantrum from prison. We knew this work came with risks. I accepted those risks when I signed on. Song leaned forward. Sarah, this isn't about pride or proving a point. Vega has resources. He has people on the outside willing to kill for him. If he's targeted you specifically, if he's making this personal instead of strategic, that's a level of threat we need to take seriously. I do take it seriously, Sarah replied. But I also know that the moment I start acting afraid, the moment I let threats change how I operate, I lose credibility with every family I'm trying to protect. They need to believe that standing up to cartels is possible, that testifying is worth the risk. I can't ask them to be brave if I'm hiding in a safe house. Song studied her for a long moment. You know, when Hale first put your name in his emergency contacts, when he said you were the one person he'd trust with his life, I thought it was just soldier nostalgia. 2 old combat veterans remembering the glory days. But working with you these past months, seeing how you lead this program, I understand what he saw in you. What's that? Sarah asked. Someone who genuinely doesn't know how to quit. Someone whose default response to impossible odds is to run toward the fire instead of away from it. It's inspiring and terrifying in equal measure. I'll take that as a compliment, Sarah said. It was meant as one. Song stood to leave. Just promise me you'll be careful. The program needs you. Your team needs you. And I suspect Marcus needs his mother more than he'd ever admit. I'm always careful, Sarah replied. I'm just not afraid. That evening, Sarah drove to the military hospital where James Hale was still undergoing physical therapy for the injuries Vega's people had inflicted. The federal agent had made remarkable progress over the past months. He could walk now without assistance. His vision had partially recovered. The broken fingers would never be fully functional, but he had learned to adapt. She found him in the physical therapy room, working through exercises with the determined grimness of someone who had spent 9 months relearning how to use his own body. Ghost, Hale said when he spotted her. His voice was still rough, damaged vocal cords from the torture, but it carried genuine warmth. Come to check on the invalid. Come to see how the stubborn bastard who refuses to admit he should retire is doing, Sarah corrected. She grabbed a chair, sat down while Hale continued his exercises. Song told me about the Vega threats. Figured she would, Hale replied. What are you going to do about it? Same thing I've been doing. Run the program, protect families, try not to get killed. Hale stopped his exercises, looked at her directly. Sarah, I know you. I know that your default setting is charge ahead and damn the consequences, but Vega is different. He's got nothing to lose now. Life in prison means he can dedicate every resource, every contact, every favor he's owed to making you suffer. That's not tactical. That's personal vendetta from a man with unlimited time to plan. So what do you suggest? Sarah asked. That I quit. That I let him win by making me afraid. I suggest you remember that courage without caution is just another word for suicide. Hale's voice was gentle but firm. You've built something important with Guardian Protocol, something that's saving lives. Don't throw that away because you're too proud to admit you need extra security. Sarah considered his words. Hale had earned the right to speak bluntly. He had taught her combat medicine, had saved her life in Fallujah, had trusted her enough to put her name in his emergency contacts knowing she would come even if it meant walking into hell. All right, she said finally. I'll increase security protocols, vary my routes, maybe even accept FBI protective surveillance for a while, but I'm not hiding and I'm not slowing down the program's expansion. Fair enough, Hale replied. He resumed his exercises. How's Marcus doing? Sarah smiled. He got accepted to medical school, University of Texas. Starts next fall. He's already talking about specializing in trauma surgery. Following his mother's footsteps, Hale observed. That's either the highest compliment a parent can receive or proof that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Maybe both, Sarah agreed. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two soldiers who had been through hell together and come out the other side changed but not broken. Finally, Hale spoke again. You know what the difference is between you and most people I've served with? Most people, even good soldiers, eventually find their limit. The mission that's too hard, the risk that's too high, the cost that's too steep. They hit that wall and they stop. But you, Sarah Brennan, I don't think you have a limit. I think you'd walk through fire every single day for the rest of your life if you thought it would save even one person. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Sarah asked. Hale smiled, yes. 2 weeks later, Sarah stood at the El Paso National Cemetery, in front of a headstone that marked a grave she visited every year on the anniversary of the day everything changed. The stone was simple gray granite with clean letters that read Captain Daniel Brennan, 75th Ranger Regiment, 1982 to 2012, not for self but for country. Marcus stood beside her, taller now than his father had been, carrying himself with a confidence that came from surviving violence and choosing to become someone who protected others. He placed flowers on the grave, yellow roses that had been Daniel's favorite. Hey Dad, Marcus said quietly, it's me. I got accepted to medical school. Mom probably already told you somehow, wherever you are. I'm going to study trauma medicine. Going to save lives the way Mom did, the way you did by choosing to serve. He paused, gathering thoughts. I understand now why you made the choices you made, why you joined the Rangers, why you testified about the corruption even though you knew it was dangerous. You taught me that some things are worth the risk, that standing up for what's right matters even when it costs everything. Sarah felt tears running down her face but made no move to wipe them away. She had cried here before, would probably cry here again. This place held grief and pride, and the weight of sacrifice that never quite got lighter no matter how many years passed. I'm proud of you, baby, she said to Marcus. Your father would be proud too. Are you scared, Marcus asked, about the Vega threats, about what might happen? Sarah considered lying, giving him the answer that would be comforting instead of true. But Marcus deserved honesty. He had earned it by surviving what most 19-year-olds would have broken under. Terrified, she admitted. Every single day I'm scared that Vega will find a way to hurt you or the team or the families we're protecting. But being scared doesn't mean you stop. Your father taught me that. Being scared just means you understand the stakes and you choose to fight anyway. They stood at the grave for a few more minutes, then walked back to Sarah's car. The cemetery was peaceful in the afternoon sun, rows of white headstones marking lives given in service, sacrifices made so others could live free. Sarah's phone buzzed. Message from Doc Morrison. Family in San Antonio needs emergency extraction. Cartel death threat. Time sensitive. She looked at Marcus. You want to ride along, see how the program works in real time. Marcus nodded. Let's go save some lives. They drove toward the Guardian Protocol headquarters, toward another mission and another family, and another chance to make the difference between living and dying. Behind them, Daniel Brennan's grave stood silent witness to the legacy he had left, the son he had raised even in death, the wife he had loved who had taken his commitment to service and turned it into something that would outlast any individual life. The sun was setting over El Paso, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that made the desert look almost peaceful. Sarah drove through that beauty knowing that violence lurked in the same landscape, that cartels operated in those same hills, that families were terrified in cities that looked safe and normal. But she also knew that Guardian Protocol was there, that Doc Morrison and Victor Castellano and a growing team of dedicated operators were standing between innocent people and the men who wanted them dead, that every family they saved was a victory against cynicism and fear, and the forces that said speaking truth wasn't worth the cost. Her encrypted phone rang. Agent Song. Sarah, we've got a situation. Multiple families at risk across 3 states. Coordinated cartel response to recent prosecutions. We need Guardian Protocol to run simultaneous extractions in Phoenix, Albuquerque, and San Antonio. How many families? Sarah asked. 12, Song replied. 47 people total including children, and we've got maybe 8 hours before the hit squads move. Sarah pulled into Guardian Protocol headquarters, already running through logistics and team assignments in her head. Marcus beside her was texting, probably alerting Doc and Victor that they had a major operation incoming. We'll handle it, Sarah told Song. Guardian Protocol doesn't leave people behind. She ended the call, looked at her team assembling in the operations center, Doc checking medical supplies, Victor coordinating with his intelligence contacts, 3 regional team leaders joining via video conference, and Marcus, young and untested but determined to contribute however he could. All right, people, Sarah addressed the room. We've got 12 families across 3 states who need us tonight. 47 lives depending on us moving faster and smarter than the people trying to kill them. This is what we trained for. This is why Guardian Protocol exists. She pulled up maps and deployment schedules and extraction routes. Let's show them what we're made of. Let's prove that standing up to evil is worth it because there are people like us who refuse to quit, who refuse to abandon anyone, who run toward the fire when everyone else is running away. The team mobilized with practiced efficiency. Within 20 minutes, they had 3 tactical teams heading to 3 different cities, each with clear objectives and backup protocols and the absolute commitment to succeed. Sarah stayed at headquarters coordinating operations, watching feeds from body cameras and drones, making split-second decisions about routes and timing, and when to call in federal support versus handling situations with Guardian resources. One by one, the families were secured. The Martinez family in Phoenix, father who had testified about construction fraud. The Chen family in Albuquerque, mother who had witnessed a murder. The Rodriguez family in San Antonio, teenage daughter who had refused cartel recruitment and paid for it with death threats. 12 families, 47 people, all safe, all extracted clean, 0 casualties, 0 compromises. By midnight it was over. The teams were returning to base. The families were in federal custody heading toward new identities and new lives. The cartels who had planned coordinated hits found empty houses and frustrated hitmen who had nothing to show for their efforts except the knowledge that Guardian Protocol was real and effective and not going away. Sarah sat in her office, reviewing after-action reports when Doc Morrison knocked on the door frame. "Hell of a night, ma'am." "Hell of a team," Sarah corrected. "Could not have done it without every single person who suited up and ran into danger tonight." Doc settled into a chair. "You know what this reminds me of? Vietnam. We had nights like this. Casualties pouring in from 3 different firebase attacks, everyone exhausted, everyone running on nothing but commitment to the wounded, and somehow we got through it because good people refused to quit." He looked at Sarah directly. "That's what you've built here, not just a program, a family of people who refuse to quit, who understand that every life matters. That's a legacy worth protecting." Sarah felt the weight of 6 months settling on her shoulders, the families saved, the operations run, the risks taken, the cost paid in sleepless nights and constant vigilance, and the knowledge that failure meant innocent people died. "It's worth it," she said quietly. "Every bit of it. As long as there are families who need protection, as long as there are people brave enough to testify against evil, Guardian Protocol will be there. That's the promise I made, and it's a promise I intend to keep." Doc stood to leave. "Your father would be proud, you know. Daniel Brennan, the ranger who died stopping corruption. He raised a son who chose to continue that fight and a wife who turned one man's sacrifice into a program that saves dozens. That's how legacy works. Not in monuments or medals, but in lives changed and people saved." After Doc left, Sarah sat alone in her office. Outside the windows, El Paso glowed with streetlights and traffic, and the ordinary life of a city that had no idea how close 47 people had come to dying tonight. Her encrypted phone buzzed one more time. Message from an unknown number. Just 3 words that made her blood run cold. "I'm still waiting." No signature, no context, but Sarah knew who had sent it. Ramon Vega, from his supermax cell with nothing but time and hatred and resources deployed toward one goal: revenge against the woman who had stopped him. Sarah looked at the message for a long moment. Then she deleted it. Vega could wait all he wanted, could plot and plan and deploy whatever resources he had left. It didn't matter. Because Sarah Brennan was done running from threats, done letting evil dictate how she lived. She had a mission and a team and families depending on her commitment to never leave anyone behind. The war with the cartels would continue. There would be other threats, other Vegas with other vendettas, but there would also be Guardian Protocol, standing between the innocent and those who hunted them, making the promise that every person who found the courage to testify would find protection when they needed it most. Sarah stood, turned off the lights in her office, and headed home. Tomorrow there would be another family, another mission, another chance to prove that courage and commitment could make a difference in a world that often seemed determined to prove otherwise. But tonight 47 people were safe. Tonight the good guys won. And for Sarah Brennan, former flight medic turned guardian of the innocent, that was enough. That would always be enough. The night sky over El Paso was vast and dark and full of stars. Somewhere under that same sky, families slept safely because people they would never meet had chosen to stand between them and violence. That was the promise. That was the mission. Guardian Protocol. No one gets left behind, not ever, not on Sarah Brennan's watch. The story ends here, but the Guardian's work continues. Hey everyone, thank you for watching Sarah's story. As a storyteller, this one hit different. A mother who traded her scrubs for tactical gear because no government agency moved fast enough to save her son. The part that gets me, she didn't want revenge. She wanted justice. And that's the difference between a warrior and a killer. Question for you veterans out there. Have you ever had to choose between following the rules and doing what's right? Drop your thoughts below. And if you want more stories about quiet heroes who refuse to quit, hit that subscribe button. Next story drops Friday.